Hello and welcome to Zenith Players Presents Part 1 of we don't know how many of the Titanic disaster hearings. I'm TJ, I'm our technical director. All of the actors you'll be hearing tonight are volunteering their time and talent from their home to bring a little bit of entertainment into your homes. We want to thank them very much for joining us. We'd also like to thank our friend, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare, for hosting this on his pages. You can check out his website, shakespeareapproves.com. It's Patreon at patreon.com/Shakespeare. Find out more about him at the aforementioned website or by visiting his Facebook page, Shakespeare Approves, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. I will try and put links to visit him as well as some of our other performer friends in the comments of this video. As always, we want to acknowledge and thank all the medical professionals and essential workers who've been working tirelessly to keep us all as healthy and safe as possible. If you're interested in more information about us and our totally volunteer organization, you can check out our website, zenithplayers.com. Feel very free to check out our very attractive donations page. 100% of all donations go towards production costs, which these days consist of the various subscriptions that allow for these readings to happen, and will shortly go towards our first live production, and we don't remember how many months, Bernhardt Hamlet. That'll be opening in November in Bud Lake, New Jersey. If you would like to read with us in future projects, send us an email at casting@zenithplayers.com, and we'll get you on board. You can join us next week as we continue this series, and then we'll be off the following week. But for now, relax and enjoy as Senator Smith, Claire Bohenick, as Mr. J. Bruce Ismay, Shakira Searle, as the captain of the Carpathia, Mira Singer, as Senator Newlands, Steve Anderson, as Mr. J. A. Hughes, Andrea Atwood, as Mr. Guglielmo Marconi, Emily Brennan, as Mr. Charles Lightaller, Andrew Gellos, in day one of the Titanic disaster hearings. The Subcommittee of the Committee on Commerce, United States Senate, Friday, April 19th, 1912, New York, New York. Subcommittee met at 10:00 a.m., 10:30 a.m. Present were Senator William Alden Smith, Chairman, Senator Francis G. Newlands. Present also were Mr. George Euler, Supervising Inspector General, Steamboat Inspection Service, Department of Commerce and Labor. Mr. J. Bruce Ismay, General Manager of the International Mercantile Marine Company, Charles C. Burlingham, Esquire, and J. Parker Curlin, Esquire, representing the White Star Line, Emerson E. Parvin, Esquire, Secretary, International Mercantile Marine Company, Guglielmo Marconi, President of the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company, the Honorable John W. Griggs, representing the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company, and others.
For the purpose of executing the command and direction of the Senate of the United States, the inquiry which we contemplate will now begin. The resolution is as follows.
In the Senate of the United States, April 17th, 1912, to resolve that the Committee on Commerce or a subcommittee thereof is hereby authorized and directed to investigate the causes leading to the wreck of the White Star Liner Titanic with its attendant loss of life so shocking to the civilized world. Resolved further that said committee or a subcommittee thereof is hereby empowered to summon witnesses, send for persons and papers to administer oaths, and to take such testimony as may be necessary to determine the responsibility therefor, with a view to such legislation as may be necessary to prevent, as far as possible, any repetition of such a disaster. Resolved further that the committee shall inquire particularly into the number of lifeboats, life rafts, and life preservers, and other equipment for the protection of the passengers and crew, the number of persons aboard the Titanic, whether passenger or crew, and whether adequate inspections were made of such vessel in view of the large number of American passengers traveling over a route commonly regarded as dangerous from icebergs, whether it is feasible for Congress to take steps looking to an international agreement to secure the protection of sea traffic, including regulation of the size of ships and designation of routes. Resolved further, that in the report of said committee it shall recommend such legislation as it shall deem expedient, and the expenses incurred by this investigation shall be paid from the contingent fund of the Senate upon vouchers to be approved by the chairman of said committee. Charles G. Bennett, Secretary, by H. M. Rose, Assistant Secretary.
I will ask Mr. J. Bruce Ismay to come forward and take the stand.
Mr. J. Bruce Ismay, being duly sworn by the chairman, testified as follows.
Mr. Ismay, for the purpose of simplifying this hearing, I will ask you a few preliminary questions. First, state your full name, please.
Joseph Bruce Ismay.
And your place of residence?
Liverpool.
And your age?
I shall be 50 on the 12th of December.
And your occupation?
A ship owner.
Are you an officer of the White Star Line?
I am.
In what capacity?
Managing Director.
As such officer, were you officially designated to make the trial trip of the Titanic?
No.
Were you a voluntary passenger?
A voluntary passenger, yes.
Where did you board the ship?
At Southampton.
At what time?
I think it was at 9:30 in the morning,
Of what day?
the 10th of April,
The port of destination was New York.
New York.
Will you kindly tell the committee the circumstances surrounding your voyage, and as succinctly as possible, beginning with your going aboard the vessel at Liverpool, your place of the ship on voyage, together with any circumstances you feel would be helpful to us in this inquiry?
In the first place, I would like to express my sincere grief at this deplorable catastrophe. I understand that you gentlemen have been appointed as a committee of the Senate to inquire into the circumstances. So far as we are concerned, we welcome it. We court the fullest inquiry. We have nothing to conceal, nothing to hide. The ship was built in Belfast. She was the latest thing in the art of shipbuilding. Absolutely no money was spared in her construction. She was not built by contract. She was simply built on a commission. She left Belfast, as far as I remember. I am not absolutely clear about these dates. I think it was on the 1st of April. She underwent her trials, which were entirely satisfactory. She then proceeded to Southampton, arriving there on Wednesday.
Will you describe the trials she went through?
I was not present. She arrived at Southampton on Wednesday the 3rd, I think, and sailed on Wednesday the 10th. She left Southampton at 12 o'clock. She arrived in Cherbourg that evening, having run over at 68 revolutions. We left Cherbourg and proceeded to Queenstown. We arrived there, I think, about midday on Thursday. We ran from Cherbourg to Queenstown at 70 revolutions. After embarking the mails and passengers, we proceeded at 70 revolutions. I am not absolutely clear what the first day's run was, whether it was 464 miles or 484 miles. The second day, the number of revolutions was increased. I think the number of revolutions on the second day was about 72. I think we ran on the second day 519 miles. The third day revolutions were increased to 75, and I think we ran 546 or 549 miles. The weather during this time was absolutely fine, with the exception, I think, of about 10 minutes fog one evening. The accident took place on Sunday night. What the exact time was, I do not know. I was in bed myself, asleep, when the accident happened. The ship sank, I am told, at 2:20. That, sir, I think is all I can tell you. I understand that it has been stated that the ship was going at full speed. The ship never had been at full speed. The full speed of the ship is 78 revolutions. She works up to 80. So far as I am aware, she never exceeded 75 revolutions. She had not all her boilers on. None of the single-ended boilers were on. It was our intention, if we had fine weather on Monday afternoon or Tuesday, to drive the ship at full speed. That, owing to the unfortunate catastrophe, never eventuated.
Will you describe what you did after the impact or collision?
I presume the impact awakened me. I lay in bed for a moment or two afterwards, not realizing probably what had happened. Eventually, I got up and walked along the passageway and met one of the stewards and said, "What has happened?" He said, "I do not know, sir." I then went back into my room, put my coat on, and went up on the bridge, where I found Captain Smith. I asked him what had happened, and he said, "We have struck ice." I said, "Do you think the ship is seriously damaged?" He said, "I'm afraid she is." I then went down below, I think it was, where I met Mr. Bell, the chief engineer, who was in the main companionway. I asked if he thought the ship was seriously damaged, and he said he thought she was, but was quite satisfied the pumps would keep her afloat. I think I went back onto the bridge. I heard the order given to get the boats out. I walked along the starboard side of the ship, where I met one of the officers. I told him to get the boats out.
What officer?
That I could not remember, sir. I assisted, as best I could, getting the boats out and putting the women and children into the boats. I stood upon that deck practically until I left the ship in the starboard collapsible boat, which is the last boat to leave the ship, so far as I know. More than that, I do not know.
Did the captain remain on the bridge?
That I could not tell you, sir.
Did you leave him on the bridge?
Yes, sir.
His first statement to you was that he felt she was seriously damaged?
Yes, sir.
And the next statement of the chief engineer was what?
To the same effect.
To the same effect?
Yes.
But that he hoped the pumps might keep her afloat?
Yes.
Did you have any talk with any officer other than the captain or the chief engineer and the steward that you met?
Not that I remember.
Did the officers seem to know the serious character of this collision?
That I could not tell, sir, because I had no conversation with them.
Did any officer say to you that it evidently was not serious?
No, sir.
All the officers with whom you talked expressed the same fear, saying that it was serious?
I did not speak to any of them, sir.
Except the captain?
Except the captain and the chief engineer. I've already stated that I had spoken to them, but to no other officer that I remember.
You went to the bridge immediately after you had returned to your room.
After I had put on my coat, I went up to the bridge.
And you found the captain there?
The captain was there.
In what part of the ship were your quarters?
My quarters were on the B deck, just after the main companionway.
I wish you would describe just where that was.
The sun deck is the upper deck of all. Then we have what we call the A deck, which is the next deck, and then the B deck.
The second passenger deck?
We carry very few passengers on the A deck. I think we have a diagram here that will show you these decks. Here it is, and there's the room I was occupying.
What is the number of that room?
B52 is the room I had.
You had the suite.
I had the suite. I was sleeping in that room, as a matter of fact.
Do you know whether there were any passengers on that deck?
I have no idea, sir.
You say that the trip was a voluntary trip on your part?
Absolutely.
For the purpose of viewing this ship in action, or did you have some business in New York?
I had no business to bring me to New York at all. I simply came in the natural course of events, as one is apt to do in the case of a new ship, to see how she works, and with the idea of seeing how we could improve upon her for the next ship which we are building.
Were there any other executive officers of the company aboard?
None.
Was the inspector or builder on board?
There was a representative of the builders on board.
Who was he?
Mr. Thomas Andrews.
In what capacity was he?
I do not quite follow you.
What was the occasion for his coming to make the trial trip?
As a representative of the builders, to see that everything was working satisfactorily, and also to see how he could improve the next ship.
Was he a man of large experience?
Yes.
Had he had part of the construction of the ship himself?
Yes.
Was he among the survivors?
Unfortunately, no.
How old a man was he?
It is difficult to judge a man's age, as you know, but I should think he was perhaps 42 or 43 years of age. He may have been less. I really could not say.
Then you were the only executive officer aboard representing your company aside from the ship's customary complement of officers?
Yes, sir.
Did you have occasion to consult with the captain about the movement of the ship?
Never.
Did he consult with you about it?
Never. Perhaps I'm wrong in saying that. I should like to say this. I do not know that it was quite a matter of consulting him about it or of his consulting me about it. But what we had arranged to do was that we would not attempt to arrive in New York at the lightship before 5 o'clock on Wednesday morning.
That was the understanding.
Yes, but that was arranged before we left Queenstown.
Was it supposed that you could reach New York at the same time without putting the ship to its full running capacity?
Oh, yes, sir. There was nothing to be gained by arriving at New York any earlier than that.
You spoke of the revolutions on the early part of the voyage.
Yes, sir.
Those were increased as the distance was increased?
The Titanic being a new ship, we were gradually working her up. When you bring out a new ship, you naturally do not start her running full speed until you get everything working smoothly and satisfactorily down below.
Did I understand you to say that she exceeded 70 revolutions?
Yes, sir. She was going 75 revolutions on Tuesday.
On Tuesday?
No, I am wrong. On Saturday. I am mixed up as to the days.
The day before the accident?
The day before the accident. That, of course, is nothing near her full speed.
During the voyage, do you know of your own knowledge of your proximity to icebergs?
Did I know that we were near icebergs?
Yes.
No, sir, I did not. I know ice had been reported.
Ice had been reported?
Yes.
Did you personally see any icebergs or any large volume of ice?
No, not until after accident.
Not until after the wreck?
I had never seen an iceberg in my life before.
You never saw one before?
No, sir.
Had you ever been on this so-called northern route before?
We were on the southern route, sir.
On this Newfoundland route?
We were on the long southern route, not on the northern route.
You were not on the extreme northern route?
We were on the extreme southern route for the westbound ships.
What was the longitude and latitude of the ship? Do you know?
That I could not tell you. I am not a sailor.
Were you cognizant of your proximity to icebergs at all on Saturday?
On Saturday? No, sir.
Do you know anything about a wireless message from the America to the Titanic?
No, sir.
Saying that the America had encountered ice in that latitude?
No, sir.
Were you aware of the proximity of icebergs on Sunday?
On Sunday? No, I did not know on Sunday. I knew that we would be in the ice region that night sometime.
That you would be or you were?
That we would be in the ice region Sunday night.
Did you have any consultation with the captain regarding the matter?
Absolutely none.
Or with any other officer of the ship?
With no officer at all, sir. It was simply out of my province. I am not a navigator. I was simply a passenger on board the ship.
Do you know anything about the working of wireless service on the ship?
In what way? We had wireless on the ship.
Had you taken any unusual precaution to have a reserve power for this wireless?
I believe there was, but I have no knowledge of that myself.
Do you know how long the wireless continued to operate after the blow or collision?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you, at any time, see the operator of the wireless?
I did not.
Did you attempt to send any messages yourself?
I did not.
Were you outside on the deck or any deck when the order was given to lower the lifeboats?
I heard Captain Smith give the order when I was on the bridge.
You heard the captain give the order?
Yes, sir.
Will you tell us what he said?
It is very difficult for me to remember exactly what was said, sir.
As nearly as you can.
I know I heard him give the order to lower the boats. I think that is all he said. I think he simply turned around and gave the order.
Was there anything else said as to how they should be manned or occupied?
No, sir, not that I heard. As soon as I heard him give the order to lower the boats, I left the bridge.
You left the bridge?
Yes.
Did you see any of the boats lowered?
Yes, sir.
How many?
Certainly 3.
Will you tell us, if you can, how they were lowered?
They were swung out, people were put into the boats from the deck, and then they were simply lowered away down to the water.
Were these lifeboats on various decks?
They were all on one deck.
On what deck?
On the sun deck, the deck above this. I do not think it is shown on this plan.
That is the second deck above yours?
On this deck here on the big plan.
On the sun deck?
Yes, that on what we call the sun deck or the boat deck.
They were on the boat deck, which would be the upper deck of all.
The upper deck of all, yes.
Was there any order or supervision exercised by the officers of the ship in the loading of these lifeboats?
Yes, sir.
I wish you would tell us just what that was.
That I could not say. I could only speak from what I saw for myself.
That is all I wish for you to do.
The boats that were lowered where I was were in charge of the officer and were filled and lowered away.
They first put men into the boats for the purpose of controlling them.
We put in some of the ship's people.
Some of the ship's people.
Yes.
How many?
That I could not say.
About how many?
I could not say.
About 3 or 4?
The officer who was there will be able to give you that information, sir. My own statement would be simply guesswork. His statement would be reliable.
In the boat which you left the ship, how many men were on board?
4.
Besides yourself?
I thought you meant the crew.
I did mean the crew.
There were 4 of the crew.
What position did these men occupy?
I do not know, sir.
Were any of them officers
No.
or seamen?
I believe one was a quartermaster.
One was the quartermaster.
I believe so, but I do not know.
You saw 3 of the boats lowered yourself,
Yes.
and 3 of them loaded.
Yes.
As they were loaded, was any order given as to how they should be loaded?
No.
How did it happen that the women were first put aboard these lifeboats?
The natural order would be women and children first.
Was that the order
Oh, yes.
that was followed,
As far as practicable.
so far as you observed?
So far as I observed.
And were all the women and children accommodated in these lifeboats?
I could not tell you, sir.
How many passengers were in the lifeboat which you left the ship?
I should think about 45.
45.
That is my recollection.
What was its full capacity? Or was that its full capacity?
Practically.
How about the other 2 boats?
The other 3, I should think, were fairly loaded up.
The 3 besides the one you were in.
Yes.
Was there any struggle or jostling?
I saw none.
Or any attempts by men to get into the boats?
I saw none.
Were these women passengers designated as they went into the boat?
No, sir.
Those that were nearest the lifeboat were taken in as fast as they were taken in?
We simply picked the women out and put them in the boat as fast as we could.
You picked them from among the throng?
We took the first ones that were there and put them in the lifeboats. I was there myself and put a lot in.
You helped put some of them in yourself?
I put a great many in.
Were children shown the same consideration as the women?
Absolutely.
Did you see any lifeboat without its complement of oarsmen?
I did not.
Did you see the first lifeboat lowered?
That I could not answer, sir. I saw the first lifeboat lowered on the starboard side. What was going on the port side, I have no knowledge of.
It has been intimated, Mr. Ismay, that the first lifeboat did not contain the necessary number of men to man it,
As to that, I have no knowledge, sir.
and that women were obliged to row the boat. Mr.
I
Hughes?
believe that is the second lifeboat, Senator.
The second lifeboat, and that the women were obliged to row that boat from 10:30 o'clock at night until 7:30 o'clock in the next morning.
The accident did not take place until 11.
Well, from after 11:30 o'clock at night until between 6 and 7 o'clock the next morning,
Of that, I have no knowledge.
until the Carpathia overtook them. You have no knowledge of that.
Absolutely none, sir.
So far as your observation went, would you say that was not so?
I would not say either yes or no, but I did not see it.
When you first went onto the deck, you were only partially clothed.
That is all, sir.
And as I understand, you went as far as to encounter an officer or a steward,
Yes, sir.
and then you returned.
That is right.
How long were you on the ship after the collision occurred?
That is a very difficult question to answer, sir. Practically until the time, almost until she sank.
How long did it take to lower and load a lifeboat?
I could not answer that.
Can you approximate it?
It is not possible for me to judge the time. I could not answer that.
Were you on the Titanic an hour after the collision?
Oh, yes.
How much longer?
I should think it was an hour and a quarter.
An hour and a quarter.
I should think that was it, perhaps longer.
Did you During this time, see any of the passengers that you knew?
I really do not remember. I saw a great many passengers, but I do not think I paid very much attention to who they were. I do not remember recognizing any of them.
Did you know Charles M. Hayes?
Yes, sir.
Did you know of the presence of other Americans and Canadians of prominence?
No, sir. I knew Mr. Hayes was on board the ship.
You knew he was on the ship,
Yes, I have known him for some years.
but you did not see him after the accident occurred,
I never saw him after the accident, no.
and he is unaccounted for.
Yes, sir.
He was not among the saved.
No, sir.
What were the circumstances, Mr. Ismay, of your departure from the ship?
In what way?
Did the last boat that you went on to leave the ship from some point near where you were,
I was immediately opposite the lifeboat when she left.
Immediately opposite?
Yes.
What were the circumstances of your departure from the ship? I ask merely that.
The boat was there. There were a certain number of men in the boat, and the officer called out asking if there were any more women. And there was no response, and there were no passengers left on that deck.
There were no passengers on the deck?
No, sir. And as the boat was in the act of being lowered away, I got into it.
And at that time, the Titanic was sinking.
She was sinking.
Where did this ship collide? Was it a side blow?
I have no knowledge myself. I can only state what I have been told, that she hit the iceberg somewhere between the breakwater and the bridge.
State that again.
Between the breakwater and the bridge.
On the starboard side?
Yes.
Did you see any of the men passengers on that ship with life preservers on?
Nearly all passengers had life preservers on.
All that you saw?
All that I saw had life preservers on.
All of them that you saw?
Yes, as far as I can remember.
Naturally, you would remember that if you saw it. When you entered the lifeboat yourself, you say there were no passengers on that part of the ship?
None.
Did you at any time see any struggle among the men to get into these boats?
No.
Was there any attempt, as this boat was being lowered past the other decks, to have you take on more passengers?
None, sir. There were no passengers there to take on.
Before you boarded the lifeboat, did you see any of the passengers jump into the sea?
I did not.
After you had taken the lifeboat, did you see any of the passengers or crew with life-saving apparatus on them in the sea?
No, sir.
What course was taken by the lifeboat in which you were leaving the ship?
We saw a light some distance off, to which we attempted to pull, and which we thought was a ship.
Can you give the direction of it?
I cannot give that.
But you saw a light,
Yes, sir.
and you attempted to pull this boat toward it.
Yes, sir.
How long were you in the open sea of this lifeboat?
I should think about 4 hours.
Were there any other lifeboats in that vicinity?
Yes,
How many?
that I could not answer. I know there was one because we hailed her. She had a light and we hailed her, but we got no answer from her.
Got no answer.
No, sir.
Did you see any rafts in the open sea?
No, sir. None.
Were there any other rafts on the Titanic that could have been utilized?
I believe not.
Were all of the lifeboats of one type?
No, were 4 that are called collapsible boats.
What were the others?
Ordinary wooden boats.
How many were there?
I think there were 20 altogether.
Including both designs?
Yes, 16 wooden boats and 4 collapsible boats, I think. I am not absolutely certain.
When you reached the Carpathia, was your lifeboat taken aboard the Carpathia?
That I do not know, sir.
Did you see any other lifeboats taken aboard the Carpathia?
I did not.
What was the method of getting you aboard the Carpathia?
We simply walked up a Jacob's ladder.
What was the condition of the sea at that time?
There was a little ripple on it, nothing more.
Do you know whether all the lifeboats that left the Titanic were accounted for?
I believe so. I do not know that of my own knowledge.
I think it has been suggested that 2 of them were engulfed.
Of that I know nothing.
You would know if that were true, would you not?
I have had no consultation with anybody since the accident, with the exception of one officer.
Who was that?
Mr. Lightoller. I have spoken to no member of the crew or anybody since in regard to the accident.
What was Mr. Lightoller's position?
He was the second officer of the Titanic.
How many officers of that ship's crew were saved?
I am told 4.
Can you give their names
I cannot.
or their occupation?
I could not. The only one I know is Mr. Lightoller, who was the second officer.
I understand they are here.
I believe so. I do not know.
Mr. Ismay, what can you say about the sinking and disappearance of the ship? Can you describe the manner in which she went down?
I did not see her go down.
You did not see her go down.
No, sir.
How far were you from the ship?
I do not know how far we were away. I was sitting with my back to the ship. I was rowing all the time I was in the boat. We were pulling away.
You were rowing.
Yes, I did not wish to see her go down.
You did not care to see her go down.
No, I am glad I did not.
When you last saw her, were there any indications she had broken in two?
No, sir.
When did you last see her?
I really could not say. It might have been 10 minutes after we left her. It is impossible for me to give any judgment of the time. I could not do it.
Was there much apparent confusion on board when you saw her last?
I did not look to see, sir. My back was turned to her. I looked around once only to see her her green light, rather.
You never saw the captain again after you left him on the bridge?
No, sir.
Did you have any message from him?
Nothing.
Do you know how many wireless operators there were on board the ship?
I do not, but I presume there were 2. There is always one on watch.
Do you know whether they survived?
I'm told one of them did, but I do not know whether it is true or not. I really have not asked.
Was there any of this crew enlisted men in the English Navy?
I do not know, sir. The ship's articles will show that.
Can you tell us anything about the inspection and the certificate that was made and issued before sailing?
The ship receives a Board of Trade Passengers certificate, otherwise she would not be allowed to carry passengers.
Do you know whether that was done?
You could not sail your ship without it. You could not get your clearance.
Do you know whether the ship was equipped with its full complement of lifeboats?
If she had not been, she could not have sailed. She would not have received her passenger certificate, therefore she must have been fully equipped.
Do you know whether these lifeboats were the lifeboats that were planned for the Titanic?
I do not quite understand what you mean, sir. I do not think lifeboats are ever built for the ship. Lifeboats are built to have a certain cubic capacity.
I understand that, but I mean whether these lifeboats were completed for the ship coincident with the completion of the ship, or whether the lifeboats or any of them were borrowed from the other ships in the White Star Line.
They certainly would not be borrowed from any other ship.
Do you recollect whether the lifeboat in which you left the ship was marked with the name Titanic on the boat or on the oars?
I have no idea. I presume oars would be marked. I do not know whether the boat was marked or not. She was a collapsible boat.
Can you recollect whether that was so?
I did not look to see whether the oars were marked. It would be a natural precaution to take.
Mr. Ismay, do you know about the boiler construction of the Titanic?
No, sir, I do not. May I suggest, gentlemen, that if you wish any information in regard to the construction of the ship, in any manner, shape, or form, that I shall be only too pleased to arrange for one of the Harlan and Wolf's people to come here and give you all the information you require, the plans and everything.
We're much obliged to you. There has been some suggestion by the passengers who left the ship in lifeboats that an explosion took place after this collision. Have you any knowledge on that point?
Absolutely none.
Do you think you would have known about that if it had occurred?
Yes, I should. Do you mean to say before the ship went down?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ismay, do you know anything about the action of the amidship turbine, the number of revolutions?
No.
The reciprocating engines, you say, were going at 75 or 72 revolutions at one time?
Yes.
Have you any knowledge as to how many revolutions the amidship turbine was making?
No, sir. Those are all technical questions which can be answered by others if you desire.
What speed would 75 revolutions indicate?
I should think about 21 knots.
What is that in miles?
It is in the ratio of 11 to 13, about 26 miles, I think.
Mr. Ismay, did you have anything to do with the selection of the men who accompanied you in the last boat?
No, sir.
How were they designated?
I presume by the officer who was in charge of the boat,
And who was that?
Mr. Whale,
And he was what officer?
chief officer.
Was that done by lot or by selection?
I think these men were allocated certain posts.
Indiscriminately?
No, I fancy at the time they had what they called, I think, the boat's crew list. That is all arranged beforehand.
Can you describe those rafts?
There were none on board the ship.
Did you see any rafts actually in service?
No, sir.
Is it customary for the White Star Line to carry rafts?
I believe in the olden days we carried rafts.
Recently, that has not been done.
Not in the recent ships, no, sir.
Why?
I presume because they are not considered suitable.
Do you know what water capacity there was on that ship?
I do not, sir.
I mean, when she was stove in, how many compartments could be flooded with safety?
I beg your pardon, sir. I misunderstood your question. The ship was especially constructed to float with 2 compartments full of water.
She was constructed to float with 2 compartments full of water?
The ship was specially constructed so that she would float with any 2 compartments full of water. I think I am right in saying that there are very few ships. Perhaps I had better not say that, but I will continue now that I have begun it. I believe there are very few ships today of which the same can be said. When we built the Titanic, we had that especially in mind. If this ship had hit the iceberg stem on, in all human probability, she would have been here today.
If she had hit the iceberg head on, in all probability, would you say she would be here now?
I say in all human probability that ship would have been afloat today.
How did the ship strike the iceberg?
From the information I have received, I think she struck the iceberg a glancing blow between the end of the forecastle and the captain's bridge, just after the foremast, sir.
I understand you to say a little while ago that you were rowing with your back to the ship. If you were rowing and going away from the ship, you would naturally be facing the ship, would you not?
No. In these boats, some row facing the bow of the boat and some facing the stern. I was seated with my back to the man who was steering so that I was facing away from the ship.
You have stated that the ship was specifically constructed so that she could float with 2 compartments filled with water.
Yes.
Is that your idea then, that there were no 2 compartments left entire?
That I cannot answer, sir. I am convinced that more than 2 compartments were filled. As I tried to explain to you last night, I think the ship's bilge was ripped open.
The ship has 16 compartments.
I could not answer that, sir.
Approximately?
Approximately. That information is absolutely at your disposal. Our ship builders will give it to you accurately.
She was so built that if any 2 of these compartments should be filled with water, she would still float.
Yes, sir. If any 2 of the largest compartments were filled with water, she would still float.
Mr. Ismay, what time did you dine on Sunday evening?
At 7:30.
With whom?
With the doctor.
Did the captain dine with you?
He did not, sir.
When you went to the bridge after the collision, was there any ice on the decks?
I saw no ice at all, and no icebergs at all until daylight Monday morning.
Do you know whether any people were injured or killed from ice that came onto the decks?
I do not, sir. I heard ice had been found on the decks, but it is only hearsay.
I think I asked you, but in case it appears that I have not, I will ask you again. Were all of the women and children saved?
I am afraid not, sir.
What proportion were saved?
I have no idea. I have not asked. Since the accident, I have made very few inquiries of any sort.
Did any of the collapsible boats sink, to your knowledge, after leaving the ship?
No, sir.
What was the full equipment of lifeboats for a ship of this size?
I could not tell you that, sir. That is covered by the Board of Trade regulations. She may have exceeded the Board of Trade regulations for all I know. I could not answer that question. Anyhow, she had sufficient boats to obtain her passenger certificate, and therefore she must have been fully boated according to the requirements of the English Board of Trade, which I understand are accepted by this country. Is that not so, General?
Mr. Uller? Mr. Uller indicates yes. Mr. Ismay, did you in any manner attempt to influence or interfere with the wireless communication between the Carpathia and other stations?
No, sir. I think the captain of the Carpathia is here, and he will probably tell you that I was never out of my room from the time that I got on board the Carpathia until the ship docked here last night. I never moved out of the room.
How were you dressed? Were you completely dressed when you went into the lifeboat?
I had on a suit of pajamas, a pair of slippers, a suit of clothes, and an overcoat.
How many men, officers, and crew were there on the boat?
There were no officers.
I mean the officers of the ship.
How many officers were there on the ship?
Yes, and how many in the crew?
I think there were 7 officers on the ship.
And how many in the crew?
I do not know the full number of the crew. There were 7 officers, or 9 officers. There are always 3 officers on watch.
And how many men were in the lifeboat with you?
Oh, I could not tell. I suppose 9 or 10.
Do you know who they were?
I do not. Mr. Carter, a passenger, was one. I do not know who the others were. 3rd-class passengers, I think. In fact, all the people on the boat, as far as I could see, were 3rd-class passengers.
Did they all survive, and were they all taken aboard the Carpathia?
They all survived, yes.
You have indicated your willingness to supply the committee with any data or information that may be necessary regarding the construction and equipment of the vessel.
Any information or any data the committee may wish is absolutely at their disposal.
Have you indicated your willingness to meet over full committee?
Anytime you wish, sir.
And I suppose that includes the surviving officers.
Certainly, sir. Anybody that you wish is absolutely at your disposal.
What are your own immediate plans?
I understand that depends on you.
I thank you, on behalf of my associates and myself, for responding so readily this morning and for your statements, and I'm going to ask you to hold yourself subject to our wishes during the balance of the day. For the convenience of the captain of the Carpathia, I'm going to call him at this time.
I am entirely at your disposal at any time, sir.
The committee has decided to call the captain of the Carpathia as our next witness.
Witness sworn in by the chairman.
Please give your full name and address.
Arthur Henry Roston, Woodville, Victoria Road, Crosby, Liverpool.
What is your business, Captain?
Seaman.
How long have you been engaged in the business?
27 years.
What positions have you filled?
Every rank in the merchant service up to captain.
In what companies or on what lines?
First of all, I was 2 years as cadet on the training ship Conway in the Messy, Liverpool, after which I went under sail as an apprentice with Williams and Milligan ships. I was an apprentice for 3 years, after which I was second mate, after passing my examinations. Then, after getting my mate's certificate, I went as mate on another sailing ship. Then I passed for extra master and joined the Cunard Steamship Company in 1895.
You are now the captain of the Carpathia.
I am now captain of the Carpathia, Cunard Line.
How long have you been captain of the Carpathia?
My appointment on the Carpathia dates from the 18th of January.
Of this year?
Of this year, yes, sir.
Were you the captain of any other vessel?
The whole of last year, from the 1st of January of last year, I was captain of the Pinonia.
Of the same line?
Of the same line. Previous to that, I was captain of several other smaller cargo boats running between Liverpool and the Mediterranean.
What day did you sail with the Carpathia from New York last?
The 11th of April.
And where were you headed?
We were bound for Liverpool, Genoa, Naples, Trieste, and Fiume.
How many passengers did you have on board the Carpathia when you sailed from New York?
That I am not prepared to answer, sir. I cannot give you the exact number.
About how many?
151st, 52nd, and about 560 or 575 third. That is approximately.
Your first stop would have been Gibraltar.
Gibraltar, yes, sir.
What time in the day did you leave New York?
At noon on Thursday.
I wish you would tell the committee what occurred after that day, as nearly as you can up to the present time.
We backed out from the dock at noon on Thursday. We proceeded down the river, the weather being fine and clear, and we left the pilot at the pilot boat and passed the Ambrose Channel lightship at about 2:00 p.m. I cannot give you the exact time now because, as a matter of fact, I have not looked at a single date or time of any kind. I have not had the time to do so.
I mean, approximately?
From that up to Sunday midnight, we had fine, clear weather, and everything was going on without any trouble of any kind. At 12:35 a.m. on Monday, I was informed of the urgent distress signal from the Titanic.
By whom?
By our wireless operator, and also by the first officer. The wireless operator had taken the message and run with it up to the bridge, and gave it to the first officer, who was in charge, with a junior officer with him, and both ran down the ladder to my door and called me. I'd only just turned in. It was an urgent distress signal from the Titanic, requiring immediate assistance and giving me his position. The position of the Titanic at the time was 41, 46 north, 50, 14 west. I cannot give you our correct position, but we were then...
Did you give the hour?
Yes, 12:35. That was our apparent time. I can give you the New York time if you would rather have it.
Yes, please do so.
The New York time at 12:35 was 10:45 p.m. Sunday night. Immediately on getting the message, I gave the order to turn the ship around, and immediately I had given that order, I asked the operator if he was absolutely sure it was a distress signal from the Titanic. I asked him twice.
Just what was the signal?
I did not ask him. He simply told me he had received a distress signal from the Titanic, requiring immediate assistance, and gave me his position. He assured me he was absolutely certain of the message. In the meantime, I was dressing, and I picked up our position on my chart and set a course to pick up the Titanic. The course was north, 52 degrees west, true, 58 miles from my position. I then sent for the chief engineer. In the meantime, I was dressing and seeing the ship put on her course. The chief engineer came up. I told him to call another watch of stokers and make all possible speed to the Titanic, as she was in trouble. He ran down immediately and told me my orders would be carried out at once. After that, I gave the first officer, who was in charge of the bridge, orders to knock off all work which the men were doing on deck, the watch on deck, and prepare all our lifeboats, take out the spare gear, and have them all ready for turning out board. Immediately I had done that, I sent for the heads of the different departments, the English doctor, the purser, and the chief steward, and they came to my cabin, and then I issued my orders. I do not know whether you care to hear what my orders were exactly.
Yes, sir, we would like to hear them.
As a matter of fact, I have them all written down here. We carry an English doctor, an Italian doctor, and a Hungarian doctor. My orders were these. English doctor with assistants to remain in first-class dining room. Italian doctor with assistants to remain in second-class dining room. Hungarian doctor with assistants to remain in third-class dining room. Each doctor to have supplies of restoratives, stimulants, and everything to hand for immediate needs of probable wounded or sick. Purser with assistant purser and chief steward to receive the passengers, etc., at different gangways, controlling our own stewards and assisting Titanic passengers to the dining rooms, etc. Also to get Christian and surnames of all survivors as soon as possible to send by wireless. Inspector, steerage stewards, and master-at-arms to control our own steerage passengers and keep them out of the third-class dining hall, and also to keep them out of the way and off the deck to prevent confusion. Chief steward, that all hands would be called and to have coffee, etc., ready to serve out to all our crew. Have coffee, tea, soup, etc., in each saloon, blankets in saloons, at the gangways, to some for the boats. To see all rescued, cared for, and immediate wants attended to. My captain and all officials' cabins to be given up. Smoke rooms, library, etc., dining rooms would be utilized to accommodate the survivors. All spare berths and steerage to be utilized for Titanic's passengers, and to get all our own steerage passengers grouped together. Stewards to be placed in each alleyway to reassure our own passengers should they inquire about noise in getting our boats out, etc., or the working of engines. To all I strictly enjoined the necessity for order, discipline, and quietness, and to avoid all confusion. Chief and first officers, all hands to be called, get coffee, etc. Prepare and swing out all boats. All gangway doors to be opened. Electric sprays in each gangway and over the side. A block with line rope hooked in each gangway. A chair sling at each gangway for getting up sick or wounded. Bosun's chains, pilot ladders, and canvas ash bags to be at each gangway. The canvas ash bags for children. I may say that the canvas and bags were of great assistance in getting the infants and children aboard. Cargo falls with both ends clear, bow lines in the ends, and bights secured along ship sides for boat ropes or to help the people up. Heaving lines distributed along the ship's side and gaskets handy near gangways for lashing people in chairs, etc. Forward derricks, topped and rigged, and steam on winches, also told off officers for different stations and for certain eventualities. Ordered company's rockets to be fired at 2:45 a.m. and every quarter of an hour after to reassure Titanic. This is a copy of what I'm sending to our own company.
We would like to have you leave a copy of that with the committee if you can.
Yes, sir. I shall do it with pleasure. One more thing. As each official saw everything in readiness, he reported to me personally on the bridge that all my orders were carried out, enumerating the same, and that everything was in readiness. This was at 3:45. That was a quarter of an hour before we got up to the scene of the disaster. The details of all this work I left to the several officers, and I am glad to say that they were most efficiently carried out.
I should judge from what you say that you made 19 and a quarter knots from the time you got the signal of the distress from the Titanic until you reached the scene of the wreck or loss.
No, it was 58 miles, and it took us 3.5 hours.
From 12:35 to 3:45.
No, 3:45 is when they reported to me. I have not got to the time of arrival at the scene of action yet. I stopped my engines at 4 o'clock, and I was then close to the first boat.
Just proceed in your own way.
After interviewing the heads of the departments, I went on the bridge and remained there. While I was up there, I made inquiries, making sure that my orders were all being carried out and that everything possible was being done. At 2:40, I saw a flare about half a point on the port bow, and immediately took it for granted that it was the Titanic herself, and I remarked that she must be still afloat, as I knew we were a long way off and it seemed so high. However, soon after seeing the flare, I made out an iceberg about a point on the port bow, to which I had to port to keep well clear of. Knowing that the Titanic had struck ice, of course I had to take extra care and every precaution to keep clear of anything that might look like ice. Between 2:45 and 4 o'clock, the time I stopped my engines, we were passing icebergs on every side and making them ahead and having to alter our course several times to clear all the bergs. At 4 o'clock I stopped. At 4:10 I got the first boat alongside. Previous to getting the first boat alongside, however, I saw an iceberg close to me, right ahead, and I had to starboard to get out of the way, and I picked him up on the weather side of the ship. I had to clear this ice. I am on the scene of action now. This is 4:10 with the first boat alongside.
You are picking up these people now.
Yes.
Please describe that in your own way.
We picked up the first boat, and the boat was in charge of an officer. I saw that he was not under full control of the boat, and the officer sung out to me that he only had one seaman in the boat, so I had to maneuver the ship to get as close to the boat as possible, as I knew well it would be difficult to do the pulling. However, they got alongside, and they got them up all right. By the time we had the first boat's people in it, it was breaking day, and then I could see all the remaining boats all around within an area of about 4 miles. I also saw icebergs all around me. There were about 20 icebergs that would be anywhere from about 150 to 200 feet high, and numerous smaller bergs, also numerous what we call growlers. You would not call them bergs. They were anywhere from 10 to 12 feet high and 10 to 15 feet long above the water. I maneuvered the ship, and we gradually got all the boats together. We got all the boats alongside and all the people up aboard by 8:30. I was then very close to where the Titanic must have gone down, as there was a lot of hardly wreckage, but small pieces of broken up stuff, nothing in the way of anything large. At 8 o'clock, the Leyland Line steamer, Californian, hove up, and we exchanged messages. I gave them the notes by semaphore about the Titanic going down, and that I had got all the passengers from the boats, but we were not then quite sure whether we could account for all the boats. I told him, I think one boat still unaccounted for. He then asked me if he should search around, and I said, yes, please. It was then 10:50. I want to go back again a little bit. At 8:30, all the people were on board. I asked for the purser and told him that I wanted to hold a service, a short prayer of thankfulness for those rescued and a short burial for those who were lost. I consulted with Mr. Ismay. I ran down for a moment and told him that I wished to do this, and Mr. Ismay left everything in my hands. I then got an Episcopal clergyman, one of our passengers, and asked him if he would do this for me, which he did willingly. While they were holding the service, I was on the bridge, of course, and I maneuvered around the scene of the wreckage. We saw nothing except one body.
Floating?
Floating, sir.
With a life preserver on?
With a life preserver on. That is the only body I saw.
Was it male or female?
Male. It appeared to me to be one of the crew. He was only about 100 yards from the ship. We could see him quite distinctly and saw that he was absolutely dead. He was lying on his side like this, and his head was awash. Of course, he could not possibly have been alive and remained in that position. I did not take him aboard. For one reason, the Titanic's passengers then were knocking about the deck, and I did not want to cause any unnecessary excitement or any more hysteria among them, so I steamed past, trying to get them not to see it. From the boats, we took 3 dead men who had died of exposure.
From the lifeboats?
From the lifeboats, yes, sir.
Do you know from which boats they were taken?
No, sir. I'm only giving you the general news now. We took 3 dead men from the boats, and they were brought on board. Another man was brought up, I think he was one of the crew, who died that morning about 10 o'clock, I think, and he with the other 3 were buried at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
At sea?
At sea.
Did they have anything on their persons by which they could be identified?
One of my own officers and the Titanic's officers identified the bodies as far as possible and took everything from them that could be of the slightest clue or use. Nothing was left but their clothes. There was very little taken, of course, but as regards details, I cannot give you much. I have been too busy.
You have not the names of these men?
We have the names.
You have not them here with you?
I have not got them with me, no, sir.
Were they men or women?
Men. There were several ladies in the boats. They were slightly injured about the arms and things of that kind, of course, although I must say, from the very start, all these people behaved magnificently. As each boat came alongside, everyone was calm and they kept perfectly still in their boats. They were quiet and orderly, and each person came up the ladder or was pulled up in turn as they were told off. There was no confusion whatever among the passengers. They behaved magnificently, every one of them. As they came aboard, they were, of course, attended to. My instructions had already been given to that effect.
Captain, how many lifeboats were there?
We had 15 lifeboats alongside with passengers in them.
Of both types?
Wait a moment, please. There were 15 lifeboats alongside. We accounted for those with passengers in them. There was one lifeboat that we saw that was close to the ship, but it had been abandoned because it had got damaged and it was in a sinking condition. The officer had taken all the people out of that lifeboat and left it absolutely vacant. There was no one in it. It was empty.
What type of boat was it?
That was a lifeboat. It had been damaged. We had 2 berthen boats.
Collapsible boats?
Hardly collapsible. It is a flat raft boat with collapsible canvas sides about 2 feet deep.
To hold how many people?
One of those boats would hold 60 to 75 comfortably.
How many of those were there?
We accounted for 2. One of these burthen boats we found amongst the wreckage capsized. That was 3.
As these boats were emptied and the occupants taken aboard the Carpathia, what was done with the boats?
The boats were kept alongside.
Just in what shape were they left afloat, or were they in some way taken on the decks?
Yes, sir. I'm going to tell you that now. As the people came out, we left the boats alongside. Of course, lots of gear had been knocked out of the boats and thrown out of the way of the people as they were getting up. So while they were holding this service and while I was cruising around, I had all of my boats swung out, ready for lowering over. And while they were getting all the people aboard from the boats, I got the spare men and some of my officers and swung my boats inboard again and landed them on their blocks and secured them and swung the davits out again, disconnected the falls again, and got up the Titanic's boats. While I was cruising around, I was also getting these boats up. I got 7 of the Titanic's boats up in our davits and 6 up on the forecastle head with the forward derricks. So that is 13 boats in all.
What did you do with these boats?
We pulled them up in the davits.
Did you bring them into port?
Yes, and last night, previous to coming into the dock, we got some tenders off and lowered all the boats into the water, and these tenders took them away. Where they took them, I do not know, but we had 3 boats still left on the forecastle head, and they would have been put into the dock during the day.
Have you examined those boats personally?
I have only been in 1 or 2 of them, looked at them.
Can you tell me from what you saw of them whether they were marked Titanic?
They were all marked Titanic as they came up.
Were they apparently new boats?
They were all brand new.
They were all brand new.
Yes, as far as I could see, they appeared to me to be absolutely new boats.
All conforming to the regulations of the British Board of Trade.
Absolutely.
And as good as you would have had if you were to specify them yourself.
Quite.
Did you see any bodies afloat except as you have described?
Only 1. No more, no others.
Did you have any information as to whether the passengers or crew of the Titanic had made use of their life preservers?
I had very little opportunity of being amongst the passengers or any of them. To tell you the truth, I have been on the bridge or about my duties most of the time. I had, however, 1 or 2 conversations with the passengers on Tuesday afternoon. That was the only time I had anything to do with the people, and I heard then that all the people on the Titanic, as far as they could see, had life belts on. They'd all been supplied with life belts.
I assume that you kept watch to see whether there was any of these people afloat.
Precisely. I was cruising all about the vicinity of the disaster.
How long did you cruise around there?
In the actual vicinity of the disaster.
Yes.
Half an hour.
During that time, was there a swirl or any unnatural conditions of the sea?
Nothing whatsoever. The wind and sea were then beginning to get up. There was a moderate breeze blowing then and a little slop of the sea.
Have you any idea how much depth of water there was about that point?
Yes, about 2,000 and odd fathoms.
2,000 and odd fathoms.
Yes, I looked on the chart.
Have you concluded that you did not see the ill-fated ship at all?
Oh no. We arrived an hour and a half after she went down, after the last of her was seen.
What was the last message you had from the ship?
Engine room nearly full.
Engine room nearly full.
Yes.
And at what hour was that?
That would have been about 1 o'clock. That would be 25 minutes after.
Was that all?
That was the last message we got. It was either engine room nearly full, or engine room full, or engine room filling. The exact words I could not give you. The impression was quite enough for me as to the condition the ship was in.
And you then told them how near you were?
Yes. From the very first, I sent a message to the Titanic telling them, coming immediately to your assistance, expect to arrive 4:30. No, it was expect to arrive in 4 hours, because I had not then got up full speed.
Did you personally know the captain of the Titanic?
I knew him, yes.
How long had you known him?
I'd met him 15 years ago. I've only met him about 3 times altogether.
In your company, who is the master of the ship at sea?
The captain.
In absolute control?
In absolute control, legal and otherwise. No one can interfere.
I suppose if this had not been so, you would not have felt it proper to have gone off your course quite so far.
Quite so.
Are there prescribed routes at sea that are so definite in their character as to be well understood by the mariners?
They are, I may state this, that the position given me by the Titanic was absolutely correct, and she was absolutely on her track, bound for New York.
What would you call that course, Captain, by the Titanic was taking for New York, as to whether it would be northerly or southerly?
Oh, she was then, I forget the true course now, but she had passed what we call the corner on the Great Circle. It is some years since I was in the North Atlantic trade. I've been in the Mediterranean trade, and I have forgotten.
He's not speaking of your compass course.
I'm giving the true course.
He's asking whether the Titanic was on the northerly course or the southerly route.
Oh, he was on the southerly route.
What do you mean by that?
He makes a great circle on the most southerly route to avoid all ice as nearly as possible. That is 42 north and 47 west. That is what we call the first corner. That is the great circle track from Queenstown down to the corner. From that, he takes a straight course. I forget now the actual course.
Do you regard the route he was taking as entirely practical and appropriate at this time of the year?
Quite so. This is most exceptional.
Having the warning that the icebergs were in that vicinity, could he, under those circumstances, have changed his course somewhat to avoid them?
That is impossible for me to tell. All I know is that he was on the track of the western bound streamers, on his proper track where he ought to have been
At this time of year.
at this time of year.
Is not that the shortest route from Liverpool to New York?
No, it is the longest.
The longest?
Yes, sir.
What would have been the shortest?
The shortest route is after August, if I remember right, from September to January. From September to January, I think, is the shortest route.
But what would that be?
Oh, well, up north.
How far north?
It would be probably a couple of 100 miles north.
What would you regard the course taken by the Titanic in this trial trip as appropriate and safe and wise at this time of year?
Quite so.
What would be a safe, reasonable speed for a vessel of that size on such a course and in proximity of icebergs?
Of course, I do not know the ship. I know absolutely nothing about her.
How would you have felt yourself about it? Suppose you had been taking that course with your ship. How fast would you have felt it prudent to go in such a situation?
I can only tell you this, gentlemen. I knew there was ice about.
How did you know it?
From the Titanic.
From the Titanic's message.
Precisely. He told me he had struck ice.
Did you know it any other way?
No, sir. That was the first intimation I had that there was ice there.
You did not know it until you saw it yourself.
I knew the Titanic had struck ice, therefore I was prepared to be in the vicinity of ice when I was getting near him, because if he had struck a berg and I was going to his position, I knew very well that there must be ice about. I went full speed all we could.
You went full speed.
I did, and doubled my lookouts, and took extra precautions and exerted extra vigilance. Every possible care was taken. We were all on the qui vive.
You had a smaller ship, however, and it would respond more readily to a signal.
No,
Would it not?
no, sir, it would not. I do not maintain that for one moment.
How many men were on the bridge, on the lookout, and to speak in that situation on your ship?
There were 3 officers with me, a quartermaster, 1 man in the crow's nest, and 2 men in the eyes of the ship, that is, right forward on the deck, nearer to the water than the crow's nest.
Was that the ordinary complement, or did you put them there because of that danger?
I put an extra lookout on forward.
An extra lookout?
Yes, and the officer came up extra with me. I had another officer up with me extra. He came up voluntarily.
What would be the ordinary complement?
The ordinary complement of a night's lookout, 2 men. We keep 1 in the crow's nest and 1 in the eyes, that is, right forward.
Was there any special suffering of the Titanic's passengers after they got aboard the Carpathia?
I never heard of anything special. I cannot give you any medical reports as I have not received them yet. All I know is that the second day, Tuesday morning, the doctor came to me and said he was pleased to say that there was an entirely clean bill of health.
No damage, so far as you know, was done by one to the other, and there was no trouble or difficulty?
No, none whatever. I never heard of anything of that kind, never.
How many lifeboats do you carry on the Carpathia?
We carry 20.
What is their capacity?
I'm not prepared to say at the present moment. I cannot say. I really forget.
Do you carry 20 in obedience to the certain regulations of the British Board of Trade?
I think it is 20, yes.
What is your gross tonnage?
13,600 tons.
That is the total capacity of your ship, the tonnage?
13,600.
Oh, what is it as to passengers?
I cannot tell you. I have not come here with any data. I have not looked up anything and was absolutely unprepared for any questions. I have been too busy.
Oh, what would you say the tonnage of your ship?
13,600 tons.
What was the tonnage of the Titanic?
It was
What?
45,629 tons.
Are these regulations of the British Board of Trade new regulations or old regulations?
They're of recent date.
The fact that under these regulations, you were obliged to carry 20 lifeboats and the Titanic was only obliged to carry 20 with her additional tonnage indicates either that these regulations were prescribed long ago.
No, sir, it has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is the ship itself. The ships are built nowadays to be practically unsinkable, and each ship is supposed to be a lifeboat in itself. The boats are merely supposed to be put on as a standby. The ships are supposed to be built, and the naval architects say they are, unsinkable under certain conditions. What the exact conditions are, I do not know, as to whether it is with alternate compartments full or what it may be. That is why in our ship we carry more lifeboats, for the simple reason that we are built differently from the Titanic, differently constructed.
Approximately how many passengers are provided for on the Carpathia? I do not ask you to be accurate about it, but approximately how many?
How many did we approximately provide for on the voyage from New York?
What is your British allowance?
2,203rd and about 251st and 2nd combined.
That makes 2,450. Give us your crew complement.
That, of course, varies. We have about 300 on board now.
How many officers?
6 officers.
You say the captain of the ship is vested ordinarily with absolute control and discretion over the movements of his vessel.
Absolutely. I wish to qualify that, however. By law, the captain of the vessel has absolute control, but suppose we get orders from the owners of the vessel to do a certain thing and we do not carry it out. The only thing is then that we are liable to dismissal. I shall give an illustration of what I mean by that as regards receiving orders and so on. When I turned back to New York, I sent my messages to the Cunard Company telling them that I was proceeding to New York unless otherwise ordered. You see what I mean there? I said, for many considerations, consider New York most advisable.
And you immediately reversed your course.
I came right around for New York immediately and returned to New York. Would you like to know my reasons for coming back to New York?
Yes.
The first and principal reason was that we had all these women aboard, and I knew they were hysterical and in a bad state. I knew very well also that you would want all the news possible. I knew very well, further, that if I went to Halifax, we could get them there all right, but I did not know how many of these people were half dead, how many were injured, or how many were really sick, or anything like that. I knew also that if we went to Halifax, we would have the possibility of coming across more ice, and I knew very well what the effect of that would be on people who had had the experience these people had had. I knew what that would be the whole time we were in the vicinity of ice. I took that into consideration. I knew very well that if we went to Halifax, it would be a case of a railway journey for these passengers, and I knew they would have to go to New York, and there would be all the miseries of that. Furthermore, I did not know what the condition of the weather might be, or what accommodation I could give them in Halifax, and that was a great consideration, one of the greatest considerations that made me turn back.
And the chances for fine weather were better coming to New York than going to Halifax.
Yes, sir.
Your message to your company was practically notice that you had done this.
I had done it, but that message did not get off until Monday evening.
You were then...
When I sent that message, we had been on our way 12 hours.
Captain, is it customary to take orders from a director or general officer of this company aboard?
No, sir.
From whom do you take orders?
From no one.
Aboard the ship?
At sea, immediately I leave port until I arrive at port, the captain is in absolute control and takes orders from no one. I've never known it in our company or any other big company when a director or manager owner would issue orders on that ship. It matters not who comes on board that ship. They are either passengers or crew. There is no official status and no authority whatever with them.
You say, Captain, that you ran under a full head of steam.
Yes.
Toward the Titanic.
Yes, sir.
Would you have done so in the nighttime?
It was in the nighttime. I can confess this much, that if I had known at the time there was so much ice about, that I should not. But I was right in it then. I could see the ice. I knew I was perfectly clear. There is one other consideration. Although I was running a risk with my own ship and my own passengers, I also had to consider what I was going for.
To save the lives of others.
Yes, I had to consider the lives of the others.
You were prompted by your interest in humanity.
Absolutely.
And you took the chance.
It was hardly a chance. Of course it was a chance, but at the same time I knew quite what I was doing. I considered that I was perfectly free and that I was doing perfectly right in what I did.
I suppose no criticism has ever been passed upon you for it.
No.
In fact, I think I may say, for my associates, that your conduct deserves the highest praise.
I thank you, sir.
And we are very grateful to you, Captain, for coming here. I understand it is your purpose to leave this afternoon.
Yes, I think we sail at 4 o'clock.
If we should desire to get into communication again, what are your plans for the future? Are you headed for the south of Europe?
We go to Gibraltar. I'm just going by the same old route as before. Gibraltar, Genoa, Naples, Trieste, Fiume.
50 days back to New York?
A little less than that, about 43 days back. We sail about every 7 weeks.
Did I ask you about the number of passengers that died aboard the ship on your way to New York?
No, sir. None died on the ship, so far as I'm aware. We took 3 bodies from the boats already dead, and the third man who died on board from exposure, who was taken on board from the lifeboat, was a seaman. I'm almost sure of my statement that he was a seaman.
In the first lifeboat, you say there was only one man.
No, only one seaman. I think there were 1 or 2 more men. To tell the truth, I'm not quite sure how many men there were.
Were there any officers?
1 officer.
1 officer and 1 seaman.
And 1 seaman, yes.
How many men?
I cannot tell you. I cannot give the number of any men or seamen in any of the boats, even approximately now.
These lifeboats, of course, were being propelled by oars.
Yes,
Were there any women using these oars?
there were.
In how many boats?
I saw women, I think, in at least 2 boats rowing.
How many women using the oars?
In one, I saw 2. It is very hard to give the exact number because 1 or 2 of the boats were rather crowded, especially one boat that had got damaged and was foundering. That boat was very crowded. I could not say how many women were pulling. I saw certainly 2 or 3 women pulling at the very least. I know, as a matter of fact, in one boat there were 2 or 3 women pulling.
In what boat did Mr. Ismay come?
I have not the faintest idea. The first I knew that Mr. Ismay was aboard was when we got the last boat alongside and were getting the last passengers aboard.
You do not remember the number of seamen in that boat?
I have not the faintest idea.
Do you remember the number of men in the other boats?
I can give you no details of the seamen or anything else. I remember one thing. Unless the sailors were dressed in some distinctive uniform, I could not tell the seamen, firemen, stewards, or passengers.
When your ship arrived in New York, were any of the passengers dangerously ill?
Not to my knowledge.
How many died after you rescued them?
None. No passengers died. Only the 1 seaman.
You do not know who took the lifeboats from the Carpathia?
No.
It was probably done by the owners.
No, I had previously to this sent a wireless to the White Star Line, asking them to send a couple of tugboats down to quarantine to take these boats away, as I would not be able to come into dock with these boats up in the davits or on the forecastle ahead. There were none there, so I was worrying about these. It was a dirty night coming up to the river last night, and I was worrying about what I was going to do with the boats. I had the boats lowered halfway to the water to avoid any wasted time. When we got right off the dock, I asked them to send some tugboats out to take the boats away, as I could not dock until they were got out of the way. After that, I do not know anything about them.
Some complaint has been made because of the message of the President of the United States, which was sent to the Carpathia, was not answered. Do you know anything about that?
I heard last night that there was a message about a Major Butt. I asked my purser this morning if he remembers any message coming about Major Butt, and he said yes, the Olympic sent a message asking if Major Butt was on board, and it was answered not on board. That is the only thing I know about that message of that name, and do not remember anything else.
Was there any attempt to communicate with the Carpathia from any government vessel?
Yes, from the Chester. I got a message from the Chester. The exact words of it I quite forget now, but there was something in it about the president, something, as far as I remember, about his being anxious about the passengers, if I remember right. I was rather worried at the time, as it was foggy, and these messages came up to me on the bridge. I had my hands full. He gave me his position and told me he was coming to take the names of the passengers and wanted my position. So I answered him with my position and asked him if he could take the passengers' names. I told him the names of the first and second cabin passengers and crew had already gone. I said, "Can you take the third class names now?" I got a reply back, yes, yes.
From the Chester?
From the Chester. Those are the 2 messages I got from the Chester.
Was there any attempt made by anyone to influence you in the reading or receiving of wireless messages?
From the very commencement, I took charge of the whole thing and issued orders that every message sent would be sent under my authority, and no message was to be sent unless authorized by me. My orders were, first of all, the 2 official messages. The 2 official messages were sent to the Cunard Company and to the White Star Company, as regards to the accident, telling them that I had got an approximate number of passengers aboard and was returning to New York. That was to the White Star Company, and the other one was to our company, of course, telling them that I was proceeding to New York unless otherwise ordered, and considered New York the best for many considerations. After those 2 messages were sent, I sent a press message to the Associated Press, practically in the same words as I had sent to the companies over my signature. Those were the 3 first messages that were sent. After these messages were sent, we began sending in the names of the first-class passengers. This was by the Olympic on Monday evening. We got the first, I think, all the second off by the Olympic. Then we lost touch.
You lost touch?
We lost touch, yes.
When was that?
The hour I could not tell you. It was Tuesday morning sometime, very early in the evening, between 1 and 2, I think.
How many operators did you have on the Carpathia?
1.
Was he in constant service from the time you received the first message from the Titanic?
He was constantly at his instrument the whole time.
How old a man is he?
He is a young man. I should think he's about 25 years now.
Under whose employ?
The Marconi Company.
What is his name?
I cannot tell you. I do not know his name.
Do you know of your own knowledge of the attempt of the President of the United States to communicate directly with your ship?
Absolutely not. Nothing whatever of that.
I gather that there was no intention whatever of either ignoring his message
Oh, my word, I hope not, sir.
or neglecting it.
Absolutely no intention of any such thing, sir. It never entered the minds of anyone.
And no one attempted in any way to put a censorship over the wireless service on your ship.
Absolutely no censorship whatever. I controlled the whole thing through my orders. I said I placed official messages first. After they had gone and the first press message, then the names of the passengers. After the names of the passengers and crew had been sent, my orders were to send all private messages from the Titanic's passengers first, in the order in which they were given into the purser. No preference to any message.
You picked up a message from the Californian, did you not?
No, we did not pick up a message. Wait a minute. We knew the Californian was about because the operator had told me he had heard the Californian reply to these signals. That is all. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he hove into sight. This was at the wreck, and I left him when I returned to New York at 8:50. I think it was when I put on full speed to come back. He was searching the vicinity of the wreckage, and I left for New York. The next day, I got a message from the Californian saying, "Have searched position carefully up to noon and found nothing and seen no bodies."
Did your wireless work right up to the time you intend to use it last?
I do not follow your question, sir.
Did your wireless fail you at all?
Never. The only thing is that we were not fitted up with a long-distance installation. It's only a short-distance outfit for what we call ship messages and close-to-land situations.
How far can you communicate?
Under good conditions, 200 miles. We only reckon under ordinary conditions on 150 miles. Fog, mist, haze, snow, or any other unfavorable weather conditions make it so that we may not get more than 90 to 100 miles.
It was rather accidental then that you happened to be within the radius of your instrument when you got the Titanic.
Yes, we were only 58 miles away then.
It was providential.
The whole thing was absolutely providential. I will tell you this, that the wireless operator was in his cabin at the time, not on official business at all, but just simply listening as he was undressing. He was unlacing his boots at the time. He had this apparatus in his ear, and the message came. That was the whole thing. In 10 minutes, maybe, we would have been in bed, and we would not have heard the message.
It was a very remarkable coincidence.
It was very remarkable, and, as I say, the whole thing was providential as regards our being able to get there in time.
You could receive from a long distance, but you could not send a response?
We can always take from a long distance, yes.
You have a low-powered machine.
Yes.
From what you heard from the passengers of the crew of the Titanic, do you know whether any of them saw the Titanic sink finally?
Yes, several of the passengers to whom I have spoken saw the ship sink.
Do you remember who they were?
I think Mrs. Thayer was one.
Mrs. J.B. Thayer.
Yes, and her son Jack and Mrs. Wagner.
And Colonel Gracie?
I do not remember. I do not know the names of any of the people who were saved. I never came across them.
You never talked with them?
I had no opportunity to do so.
You were kept very busy.
Yes.
Captain
How many more lifeboats could you accommodate on the Carpathia than you have now?
Under the present conditions, and of course if they were ordinary lifeboats, I do not believe we could take more than 6 at the very outside. Of course, that is absolutely lumbering the deck up as it is.
It would be lumbering the deck up, and you would only have space for 26 in all.
Yes.
And that would lumber up the deck to some extent.
Yes, not the passenger decks. It has nothing to do with the passenger decks. It would not lumber up the passenger decks. It would be deck space that is not utilized by passengers that would be lumbered up, not the promenade decks.
I see. Would that additional number work much additional inconvenience upon the deck?
No, I do not think so.
Take the case of the Titanic, whose tonnage was more than 3 times as great as that of the Carpathia, which had, I believe, the same number of lifeboats as the Carpathia.
Yes, sir.
How many additional lifeboats could that vessel accommodate without inconvenience?
I have not the faintest idea, sir, what the Titanic was like. I believe she is a sister ship of the Olympic. I've seen the Olympic once when she was at the end of our dock. I have no idea of her construction. That is all I have seen of her.
You think she could accommodate considerably more, do you not?
If she could not accommodate them, then she could be made to accommodate them. If they build the ship knowing that she is only to carry 16 lifeboats, they will utilize the space otherwise.
How do you account for the fact that the Board of Trade of England, as the size of these ships has increased, has not compelled an increase in the number of lifeboats? Your maximum, as I understand it, is 20 boats, is it not?
Yes, I believe it is. But they have compelled a different construction of the ship itself. That is where the thing has come in.
Do you regard each ship as itself as a lifeboat?
Yes, sir.
That expectation was not realized in the case of this ship.
It has been an abnormal experience as regards the Titanic.
Have you any knowledge at all of regarding the Forsen Pact which wrecked the Titanic?
I know nothing about it, sir. I have not asked any questions about this kind of business. I knew it was not my affair, and I had little desire to make any of the officers feel it any more than they did. Mind you, sir, there is only this. I know nothing, but I have heard rumors of different passengers. Some will say one thing and some another. I would therefore rather say nothing. I do not know anything. From the officers, I know nothing. I could give you silly rumors of passengers, but I know they are not reliable from my own experience. So if you will excuse me, I would prefer to say nothing.
I think that is all, Captain, and I want to thank you for your courtesy in appearing before the committee and giving us the information at your disposal.
As to the equipment of these lifeboats, what are the requirements as to food and compass and so on?
They're all supplied with compass and with water breakers and with bread tanks.
And with mast and sail.
And with mast and sail.
And gear.
And all the necessary gear.
Do you know whether these conditions were complied with reference to these boats on the Titanic?
As far as I can see, yes. I can tell you this, that I saw myself both water and biscuits in the boats. Not all, of course, but one or two where the men were working about when we secured them. We put them on board our ship and we had to secure them, and under certain conditions we had to come up against the boats and look into them, and there were 2 or 3 boats where I did see both water and bread in the boats. And all of the boats had the bread tanks, that I know for certain, and they also had water breakers.
We're very much obliged to you, Captain Rostron.
You are quite welcome, sir. If there is anything further I can do, I shall be very glad.
After the recess, I should like to have Mr. Marconi appear before us for a few minutes.
I shall be very glad to do so, Senator.
And the operator.
He will be here by 3 o'clock, Senator.
That is the operator from the Carpathia, also the operator from the Titanic.
He is not able to come. I am afraid the committee will have to go to him.
Both his ankles and back are injured, although the last 2 days he was carried up into the Marconi operating room of the Carpathia to assist our operator all he could.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make a brief statement. A statement has been made in the press with reference to myself, concerning which I wish to say this. I received this telegram, Huntington, West Virginia. James A. Hughes. You are quoted in press reports declaring, following Mrs. Smith's story, that Ismay should be lynched. Please wire us, press rate collect 500 words, your view of Titanic disaster. The Advertiser. To that, I have sent this in reply. Huntington Advertiser, Huntington, West Virginia. Press reports untrue. My daughter said nothing that would bring any such statement from me. I may have said if investigation showed neglect of any officer, no punishment was too severe for him. Ismay was somewhat criticized by some for being among the men who were rescued. My daughter had no criticism of him. The press report will give full information as to details. Ismay gave what Senate committee considered a fair statement before the committee. He is subject to further call from the Senate committee. Captain of Carpathia before Senate committee testifying now. My daughter states all possible aid was given them by the captain on Carpathia and officers of Carpathia.
We will take recess until 3 o'clock this afternoon, whereupon at 1:20 p.m. a recess was taken until 3 p.m.
At the expiration of the recess, the hearing was resumed.
The inquiry will now be resumed. I wish to ask Mr. Marconi a few questions. Mr. Marconi, will you give the reporter your full name?
Guglielmo Marconi,
State your place of residence, please.
London, England.
Your vocation.
Electrical engineer and chairman of the British Marconi Company.
As chairman of the British Marconi Company, have you been employed in the wireless telegraphy?
Yes, a great number.
Do you have one of your employees on the Carpathia?
Yes, sir.
When she went to the rescue of the survivors of the Titanic,
Yes, sir.
what was his name?
I believe it was Cottam. I only met this man last night. I do not know his name, how his name is spelt exactly. Cottam, I think. He is here.
In the establishment of the wireless service on the boats of that character, is it done under the direction of your company?
Yes, sir.
Is the operator responsible to your company?
He is responsible insofar as the commercial work goes, as to accounting for messages and the general conducting of a commercial telegraph service.
From whom does he receive instructions as to his hours of labor for his general work in the capacity aboard the ship?
From the captain, according to the exigencies of the service.
Have you any specific instructions that he is called upon to observe in the performance of his duty?
Yes, there are numerous instructions, which are general rules and regulations for expediting the traffic and for preventing interference with other ships.
Can you state briefly what those instructions are?
They are, in the main, the same rules and regulations as are enacted by the International Convention on Wireless Telegraphy,
Known as the Berlin Treaty.
known as the Berlin Treaty, to which Great Britain is a party.
The United States is not yet a party.
It is not yet effectively a party, I understand.
The regulations of the International Convention are the basis of your regulations and instructions for your men.
Yes, absolutely.
On shipboard, must the operator take his instructions as to the hours of labor from the captain of the ship?
Yes.
Under these instructions, are you required to have more than one operator on the ship making the voyage of this character?
No, it depends. If the ship is a large one, usually 2 operators are supplied.
Do you mean the supplying of 2 operators depends on the size of the ship or upon the character of the apparatus?
I mean, if it is a large ship like the Titanic, the Olympic, the Mauretania, the Lusitania, they always carry 2 operators, but the smaller ships of the class or size of Carpathia carry 1.
When you refer to large or small ships, do you refer to the matter of the tonnage or to the matter of passenger room?
I refer to the average number of passengers carried, the number carried or the number for whom accommodation is provided. We generally presume that a ship with larger passenger accommodations will carry a great number of passengers.
Was any effort made, to your knowledge, to increase the number of operators on the Carpathia?
It is not considered necessary, and the ship owners did not consider it necessary either, so far as I am aware.
With what kind of wireless service or equipment is the Carpathia provided?
The Carpathia is provided with an equipment which I should call a short distance equipment. It is an apparatus which can transmit messages under favorable circumstances up to about 180 to 200 miles. On the average, I should say the distance is about 100 miles.
Does this depend on the weather or the sea?
It depends on numerous circumstances. It depends on the state of space, not necessarily the apparent weather. It may be a very bad day and still the messages may go all right. It also depends to a large extent on the skill of the operator.
As to the distance within communication may be effective?
Yes, if he can adjust his transmitter to its best condition, approaching its greatest efficiency, he will effect communication at the greatest distance.
Referring to the equipment on the Carpathia's its maximum efficiency would be about 180 miles?
I would say perhaps 200.
200 miles?
Sometimes perhaps more, but on very rare occasions.
Do you know about the equipment on the Titanic?
Yes,
Was the Titanic equipped by your company?
the Titanic was equipped by my company.
I wish you would describe the wireless equipment of the Titanic, stating the character of the apparatus and how modern and powerful it was.
The wireless equipment on the Titanic was a fairly powerful set, capable, I should say, of communicating 400 or 500 miles during the daytime and much farther during the nighttime.
How much farther during the nighttime?
Very often 1,000 miles. I should say almost every night 1,000 miles.
With accuracy?
With accuracy.
Would you say that the Titanic was equipped with the latest and best wireless apparatus?
Yes, I should say it was the latest apparatus for that purpose.
Did the company of which you are president designate the operators for the Titanic?
Do you mean, did it choose the operators?
Yes, or assign them.
They assign them generally in consultation with the shipping companies. They consult the shipping companies in regard to them.
What is the ordinary pay for a wireless telegrapher?
In England, on British ships, I think they commence about 30 shillings a week and they go up to over £2 per week. In addition to that, they get their boarding and lodging. I'm speaking now subject to some error because it is some time since I've been directly connected with those matters. I have a managing director who attends to the question of salaries.
Your statement is correct as far as you have made it.
Yes, sir.
In America, what is the wage?
I'm not aware of the exact wage pay in America. An official of the American company is present and he would be able to give you an accurate reply.
How many operators were on the Titanic?
I believe there were 2.
Did they both survive, do you know?
No, sir. One was drowned, died. He was the chief operator, I am informed.
And the other?
And the other was picked up, I believe. He got on a raft on a collapsible boat and was rescued by the Carpathia, having been wounded in his ankles or his legs.
At any time during Sunday last, were your offices here in communication with the Titanic?
I cannot answer that, but I can produce a person who can.
Have you been in communication with the Carpathia since the disaster to the Titanic?
I believe so. At least a great number of messages have come through from the Carpathia to my knowledge. I sent no message to the Carpathia, nor did I receive any.
Did your company?
My company has.
Your company has received no messages.
Yes, my company, I believe, has.
It has both sent and received messages.
I believe so. I have no personal knowledge, but I think they have.
Would you say, from what you know about the receipt of messages sent from and to the ship, that the wireless was working fairly well?
I believe it was working fairly well.
You believe it was in good order?
In good order, yes.
Where was the operator of the Titanic who survived?
The operator of the Titanic is on another Cunard boat, I believe at the dock. I think in Saxonia. He has been removed there, but is unable to walk in consequence of the injury to his ankles.
He has not been in the hospital.
No, I do not think he has.
What boat did you say he was on?
I think the Saxonia.
Do you know why he is on the Saxonia?
Because the Carpathia was to have sailed.
Today?
Today, and of course he did not belong to the Carpathia, he was just on board.
When does the Saxonia sail?
I do not know.
It is not the intention of the operator to return to England immediately, is it?
No, I do not think it is, and is not my intention either that he should.
Have you any authority over him?
I have the authority that the president of a company has over one of the employees.
May I request you to have him remain and present himself to the committee as soon as agreeable?
Yes, sir, I shall be very glad to instruct him to that effect.
Where's the operator of the Carpathia?
The operator of the Carpathia was instructed to be here at 3 o'clock.
Is he here?
I do not see him. We might have him called. Cottam is his name.
He is not here.
He went on board ship to take his clothes off.
And will he be back here?
He should be back here now.
I wish you would also ask him to remain.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if you will allow me, I wish to say that the operator of the Carpathia, as well as the assistant operator of the Titanic, have been detained at the instruction of the officers of the company for the purpose of being at the service of this committee.
I understand that, Governor.
They will be detained as long as is necessary for this committee to hear them. With reference to the one from the Titanic, I doubt very much whether he can be removed from the present quarters without great inconvenience.
I understand, Governor, from the officers that it is their disposition, but this being the president of the Marconi Company, I thought I would like to get to the record of his affirmative promise that it should be done.
Perhaps I should make one explanation. When I say I'm the president of the Marconi Company, these operators are really in the employ of a subsidiary company of what we call the Marconi Company. But this company is controlled by the company of which I am the chairman.
But it is insufficient to say, but is it sufficient to say that you feel that you have influence enough to carry out the wishes of the committee?
Yes, sir.
I want to know if you can tell me from your own knowledge whether there was any general interference in the time this collision occurred at sea on the part of experimental or rival service to the detriment of this service.
I should say, if you allow me, that I have only seen these operators for a few minutes, and not having been there, I cannot give a very definite answer to that question. They, no doubt, will be able to reply to it fully, but insofar as my impression goes, it is that near New York that there was some slight interference, but at a distance from New York, when the Carpathia was communicating with stations in Long Island and in Nova Scotia, there was practically no interference.
Can you tell how wide an area was communicated with from the Carpathia, generally speaking, considering, for instance, a wireless of character you describe?
Yes.
And put them in communication with your office here. In the course of that message, how far from its original point of destination would a message of that kind extend?
Of course, the message, I should say, does not come direct to our office.
Well, to your
It is taken on a coast station.
coast station, then.
Again, then it is sent on by wire to the office.
When I referred to your office, I meant the coast station.
The wireless message or the waves of the ships equipped in the way that the Carpathia is equipped would affect a space which is that contained in a circle of the diameter or 300 or 400 miles, the radius of the station being 200 miles. It will affect a space of 200 miles all around. I am now talking about the maximum range.
Then interference would be quite possible.
Interference would be quite possible, assuming that interferent stations or parties were using the same wavelength as the Carpathia. Fortunately, they use different wavelengths, and you cannot interfere while using different wavelengths.
What wavelength would be required on a communication such as the Carpathia first made to your shore stations?
I should say they were using a 600-meter wave, which is one of the international convention waves. I have not the information in regard to that, but I assume it.
Is that the minimum of the international convention?
No, that is the longest.
I meant the maximum.
Yes, sir, the maximum. The shortest is 300.
And the minimum is 300?
Yes,
This was the maximum wavelength
yes,
prescribed by international convention.
yes, sir.
Would the instrument of the Carpathia have been able to send a greater wavelength than 600?
I do not think so.
Did you hear the captain of the Carpathia testify?
I heard the end of his evidence, just the latter part.
Did you hear him say that they caught this message from the Titanic providentially?
I heard him say that.
That the operator was removing his shoes and about to retire?
Yes, sir, I quite admit that it was providential.
And that in 5 minutes more communication would have been impossible?
It was absolutely providential. I agree with the captain.
If this operator is not at his post of duty, has the wireless message no signal to arouse him?
Not the way it is installed on most boats.
Did it have on this boat?
It had not, so far as I am aware.
Did it have it on the Titanic?
I do not think so.
So that it is absolutely necessary that the operator should be at his post at the time in order to facilitate or give effect to the communications from ships or coast stations?
Yes, sir, or ships in distress, I should say.
Ships in distress and coast stations.
And coast stations. Of course, if a coast station or ship calls another ship and the operator does not answer, he simply waits until later, till the operator is awake or until he has come back. I am referring to the ordinary commercial communications.
Yes, but later in this instance would have probably meant that these passengers and crew that were saved would have been horribly lost.
Yes, sir, I quite admit that.
Do you recall any international regulations of the Berlin Convention or any provision relating to that matter?
I do not think there is any provision in regard to that matter.
Ought it not be incumbent upon these ships at sea who have wireless apparatus to have an operator always at his key?
I think it certainly should be. Of course, it might come rather hard on small ships. The ship owners will not like the expense of 2 men.
On the English basis of wage, it would not be very serious.
No, it would not be, but it is very much a matter that affects the ship owners. They do not like to carry 2 operators when they can get along with 1.
On the Titanic, if you know, there was a constant relay.
You mean a constant lookout? Constant attention?
Yes,
Yes, there should be, and there was.
that was the purpose of having 2 operators. Also,
Yeah, that was the purpose of having 2 operators, and also for the purpose of handling a greater number of messages which come to a larger and more important ship.
Are those men of equal skill?
Usually there's one man in charge who is an experienced man, and the other man is a telegraphist, but a junior man of less experience.
And less remuneration?
Yes, sir. I should, if you will allow me, state that all the wireless telegraphists employed on British ships have to get a license of competency from the English government, or they are not allowed to operate.
Does that go to their competency as to operators?
I think it does.
Does it include their character as men
Yeah, yes, sir.
and general fitness?
And general fitness.
Do you have much difficulty in supplying your stations with operators?
Sometimes we have. It takes some time to train them. We train them at a school of ours.
Do you have any regulations that touch the question of their habits?
They have to be subject to the discipline of the ship. They must obey the captain, as everyone on board a ship has to do. And of course, they have to behave in a decent manner on shore. They must not discredit the service in any way.
I should like to ask whether, in your opinion, the amateur operators of wireless stations are calculated to minimize the effectiveness of practical work on land and sea.
I think it does effectively minimize or hamper the useful communications, because on an occasion like this, I was told, I always want confirmation from a man who was there, but if I remember correctly, I was told last night that a great number of unknown stations called up the captain for news.
Unknown stations?
Yes, sir. Of course, the ship would not reply except to the authorized station sending traffic. That causes interference and causes trouble.
In England, of course.
In England, of course, that is impossible because stations are not allowed to do that.
How long has wireless telegraphy been a practical science?
I think it has been a practical science since, you mean in regard to shipping?
In regard to shipping.
I should say since 1900. Of course, great improvements have been made since then.
Who made the first successful experiment?
On ships?
Yes.
I think I did myself.
In what year?
In 1897.
Since that time, have you found it efficient in cases of similar character?
To that of the Titanic and Carpathia, yes, I'm very glad to say that it has been of paramount utility in a great number of cases.
In what cases?
The most important, looking backward, was the collision which occurred between the Republic of the White Star Line and the Florida near Nantucket, when assistance was summoned, and fortunately in that case, practically everyone was saved. Other cases have occurred with other ships. I remember a light ship in the English Channel, which was run down over 10 years ago, which obtained assistance by the same means. And one of the Cunard liners got into trouble some time ago, a long time ago, and summoned assistance by the same methods. Of course, the two important and sensational cases in which it has proved of utility have been the wreck of the Republic and this disaster to the Titanic.
Do you regard the Berlin Convention as a step in the direction of the international utility of wireless telegraphy?
I think in regard to shipping and shore stations, it is a good regulation. It is a means for regulating the working and preventing interference, provided, however, that it is administered in a fair manner by the governments concerned.
How many wireless stations are there now in the United States? Do you know?
I do not know exactly, but there is a fair number.
What is the maximum distance over which communications may be accurately made?
The longest distance I can recall is from Ireland to the Argentine Republic.
From where?
Ireland.
From what point?
Clifton, Ireland to Buenos Aires.
In the Argentine Republic?
Yes, in the Argentine Republic. That is 6,000 miles.
Have you personal knowledge of the correctness of that?
I have personal knowledge because I was at the receiving end when the message was received.
You were at the receiving end?
I was in South America at Buenos Aires. My assistants were in Ireland.
What wavelength was used in that test?
A wavelength of between 7,000 and 8,000 meters, 25,000 feet.
In that test, was there any mountainous obstructions?
There was a part of the coast of Brazil interfering between the two.
And that is mountainous?
That is the mountainous in that part.
Was the Californian equipped with wireless?
I do not know.
It was not equipped by you?
I could not say one way or the other. I should say that I travel about a great deal and ships are equipped in England when I am not there.
Have you made any experiments in transoceanic service of that character?
Yes, sir. It is employed at present for transmitting messages between Canada and Ireland, a place called Glace Bay in Canada, and another place called Clifton in Ireland.
Is that assuming a practical phase?
That is on a practical and commercial basis, the distance between being approximately 2,000 miles between the 2 points.
What wavelength is required?
The wavelength there is 7,000 meters.
When was that communication between Ireland and Buenos Aires?
It was in October in 1910.
Is there any proficiency test prescribed by any special board in England?
Yes, the operators have to pass a proficiency test before the post office authorities, which control the telegraphs in England.
Is there any in this country?
I believe there is now.
How recently?
Since a law was passed compelling passenger carrying vessels to carry wireless telegraph apparatus.
About 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago.
There seems to be a distinction between commercial business and distress or emergency business ships business. Why should that be so?
For this reason, the commercial business is paid for and accounted for between the ships and the shore stations and organizations working the telegraphs on land, whilst, of course, for distress messages and messages affecting the safety of ships, no charge is made and is not in itself a commercial business.
The Berlin Convention, however, rather exalts the emergency phase of wireless telegraphy, giving to distress calls the precedence over all other calls, does it not?
Yes, sir. It has copied us in that because that was one of our provisions before there was any Berlin Convention.
It even takes precedence of government business, does it not?
Even of government business, yes.
Mr. Marconi, were any orders given by the Marconi Company to the operators or the operator on the Carpathia with reference to the receipt and answer of messages?
None whatever.
Do you know anything about the effort of the President of the United States to communicate with the Carpathia?
Except what I've read in the newspapers.
But so far as you know, there was no disposition to censorize or control the operator of the Carpathia?
There was none whatever, and further, I was very much surprised at the things that were stated in the press. The reply had been refused or had not been transmitted.
Do you know whether there was a reply refused?
Only from what I saw in the press. I might say that the operator, of course, can speak for himself, but I asked him that question last night when I boarded the Carpathia, and he told me that he never dreamed of refusing to reply a message sent by the president.
I think that is all. We are much obliged to you.
Mr. Lightoller was sworn in by the chairman.
What is your name?
Charles Herbert Lightoller,
Mr. Lightoller, where do you reside?
Nedley Abbey, Hampshire,
England?
England.
How old are you?
38,
What is your business?
seaman,
How long have you been in that service of employment?
13 years and 3 months.
How extensive has been your service in that time?
I do not quite follow you.
How much service have you seen? In what capacities?
In all capacities in the White Star Service, a 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st officer.
You have been in the White Star Service during that time?
Yes, sir.
What official positions do you say you have held?
A 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st officer.
What position do you occupy now?
A 2nd officer of the Titanic.
How long have you been second officer?
Altogether, about 7 years.
When did you go aboard the Titanic?
In Belfast.
When?
March 19 or 20.
Did you make the so-called trial trips?
Yes, sir.
Of what did they consist?
Turning circles and adjusting compasses.
In what waters?
A Belfast loch.
How extensive is that loch?
I can hardly say offhand without seeing a chart.
Have you any data here that shows?
No.
Just state as nearly as you can.
It may be about 15 miles long, widening out from a few miles wide to perhaps 7 miles. That is only approximate, sir.
Have you ever been in that water before?
Only passing through.
How did you happen to pass through it?
Going into Belfast or coming outbound to some port. I do not mean in an official capacity as a passenger. I have been through it in an official capacity about 11 years ago.
Is that water usually selected for these trial tests for new ships?
Yes,
What was the condition of the weather when you made this trial test?
a light breeze, clear weather, sir.
From the time you boarded the Titanic, do you at any time encounter any rough weather?
No, sir.
You were always in smooth water, so-called?
Yes, sir.
Does that include the time up to this collision?
Yes, sir.
Of what do these trial tests consist?
Turning circles.
I wish you would describe that a little more fully. Under the head of steam, and how fast would the boat be moving?
Under various speeds.
In how large a radius would these circles be made?
Turning circles consists of seeing in what space a ship will turn under certain helms with the engines at various speeds.
Was this boat tested at its maximum speed?
That I could not say, sir.
What was the maximum speed of this boat?
I could not say, sir. She was never put, to my knowledge, to her maximum speed.
What did you understand it to be?
About 22 and a half to 23 knots.
From whom did you get that information?
General rumor, sir.
Did you talk with the boat's officers?
From talk generally, yes. It was only an approximate idea.
How much time was spent in the test?
I could not say exactly.
Approximately.
About 5 hours.
During that time, those circles were made
Yes, sir.
and the ship reversed
Yes, sir.
and put on a straight course
Yes, sir.
under a full head.
I could not say, sir. She steamed for a certain distance under approximately a full head of steam, but how much steam was on, I could not say, or what pressure of steam.
How many engines were there in this boat?
2 reciprocating and 1 turbine.
Were they all working on the trial test?
So far as I know, sir.
What do you know about that? Were you in the engine room?
No, sir. I was on my station, aft,
Where was your station?
the after end of the ship.
Then you would not, to your own knowledge, know whether its entire power was being tested out or not.
I should not, no, sir.
5 hours was the length of time spent making those tests.
Approximately the length of time occupied in turning those circles.
What was the next thing that was done with the ship?
She was run a certain distance on a comparatively straight course and back again.
How far?
I could not say without a chart, sir.
How long did it take you
Approximately 4 hours.
to make the straight run
Yes, sir.
and return?
And return.
4 hours altogether, 2 out and 2 back.
2 out and 2 back. That is only approximate.
Would you think, from what you observed in the movements of the ship, that it was going pretty fast?
For a ship of that size, a fair speed.
Fair speed.
A fair speed.
What would you call a real good speed?
When the ship was built, we only expected her to go 21 knots. Therefore, all over 21, we thought very good.
The ship exceeded 21 knots.
On the trials? I am not speaking of the trials. I do not know what the speed was. I have no idea.
But I understand you to say that you expected to get 21 knots out of them.
The builders, I presume, expected to get to 21.
That was the general rumor
Yes,
among the officers.
yes,
I suppose that was the hope too of the officers.
exactly.
What boat had you been on before you went on board the Titanic?
The Oceanic,
The Oceanic of the same line.
of the same line.
How large a boat is the Oceanic?
17,000 tons gross,
Do you know her maximum speed?
21 knots.
I want to be sure I get the results of these trial tests accurately. I want you to tell me how long it took to make these tests. The straightaway tests and the circle tests altogether consumed how much time?
Approximately 6 or 7 hours. I could not say any nearer than that.
What time of day did you begin these tests?
In the morning,
How early?
about 10 o'clock,
Was it clear weather?
perfectly clear.
Was there any sea?
Very little.
And after about 7 hours, the tests were concluded.
With the exception of a full speed astern, that is, to see in what distance the ship will stop with the engines full speed astern, what we call the full speed astern test.
Was that made that day?
Yes, sir.
How long did that take?
That was only a matter of minutes.
A few minutes.
A few minutes.
Do you know who was aboard the Titanic with these trial tests?
A great number. I know some of them.
And please state those that you know.
Captain Smith, Mr. Murdoch, Chief Officer, myself, First Officer, Mr. Blair, Second Officer, Mr. Pittman, Third Officer, Mr. Boxall, Fourth Officer, Mr. Lowe, Fifth Officer, Mr. Moody, Sixth Officer, and Mr. Andrews of Harlan and Wolf.
Representing the builders.
Yes, sir. I could not say anyone else with any accuracy.
Who was the chief engineer?
Mr. Bell, Chief Engineer, Mr. Ferguson, Second Engineer, Mr. Haskett, also second. That is all I know.
How many men constituted the crew?
A seaman you are speaking of?
Yes.
About 71 all told, officers and crew.
And seamen?
Yes, sir.
On the trial test.
Oh, no, sir. I am not speaking of the trial.
How many men constituted the crew on the trial tests?
About 30 of the crew and about 30 of what we call runners.
Were there any guests on the boat?
I believe there were. I could not say who.
Do you know who they were?
No, sir.
Were any of the officers of the White Star Line?
I could not say with certainty, sir.
You do not recall seeing any of them?
I do not recall. No, sir. I believe there were some on board, but I cannot remember who they were. I was not brought in contact with them.
Was Mr. Ismay aboard?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Did you hear afterward that he was on board?
No, sir.
You cannot recall any officer of the company that was?
No, sir.
I mean, any general officer
No, sir.
or director?
No, sir.
Was there anybody aboard representing the British government?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Were there any other officers of other White Star Line boats?
No, sir.
Were there any other officers of any other line of boats?
No, sir.
After the final test, what was done with the boat?
We proceeded towards Southampton.
Immediately?
Almost immediately, after taking on board a few things that had been left behind, which were required for the completion of the ship.
What?
So far as I know, requisites down in the galley, cooking apparatus, a few chairs, and such things as that.
Was the life-saving equipment?
Oh, no, sir. Nothing like that.
Was the life-saving equipment complete?
Yes, sir.
Of what did it consist?
The necessary number of lifeboats.
I wish you would say how that is determined, if you can.
By the number of people on board.
You do not know how many people are on board until you are ready to start.
No, sir.
It is not determined by the number of accommodations rather than the number of people who are aboard?
There must be life-saving apparatus for everyone on board, regardless of accommodations.
Yes, but what I desire to know is whether in each stateroom on each deck, in all classes, whether there is any rule and whether it was followed at that time. So far as you know, in equipping this boat with life preservers and life belts and anything else that might appropriately go into the rooms and be upon the decks of the boat of that character.
She was perfectly complete throughout, sir.
How many lifeboats were there?
16.
All of the same type?
Consisting of 14 lifeboats, 2 emergency boats, and 4 collapsible boats.
Tell us whether they were new entirely.
Entirely new.
And in their proper places.
In their proper places.
With the necessary lowering apparatus.
Everything complete, examined by the officers of the ship.
Was a test of the lifeboats made before you sailed for Southampton?
All the gear was tested.
Were the lifeboats lowered?
Yes, sir.
Under whose orders?
The officers, principally my orders.
Under your orders?
Yes,
Did you see the work done?
I did.
Tell just what was done.
All the boats on the ship were swung out, and those that I required were lowered down as far as I wanted them. Some all the way down, and some dropped into the water.
About 6. I wish you would give the proportion that went into the water. Was it about 6?
About 6.
And the others lowered?
Part of the way, as far as I thought necessary.
Part of the way.
Yes,
Of course, part of the way would not do anybody much good on a sinking ship. I assume you did that for the purpose of trying the gear, not for the purposes of testing the security of the lifeboats.
it is principally the gear that we test. The lifeboats we know to be all right.
These boats were lowered from what deck?
From the boat deck.
Is that the sun deck?
That is the top deck.
Do you know how far it was from the top deck to the water?
70 feet.
What time did you reach Southampton?
About midnight.
Of which day?
I could not say.
Think it over.
I think it was the morning of the 4th of April,
What makes you think it was the morning of the 4th?
because we sailed on the 10th.
How long did it take to make the run to Southampton?
About 24 hours.
Did you strike any heavy weather?
No, sir.
How fast did you go?
About 18 knots.
What was done when you reached Southampton?
The ship was heeled for stability.
Just describe that, if you would.
The builders, knowing the exact weights on board, additional weights are placed on each side of the ship. A pendulum is suspended in the most convenient place in the ship with a plumb on the end of it, and a method of registering the difference with the plumb line. A number of men then transfer the weights from one side of the ship to the other, bringing all the weight on one side and transferring the whole of it back again. And with this, I believe the builders are able to draw up a stability scale.
From what part of the ship are these tests made?
The weights carried over, you mean?
Yes, from the upper part?
The C deck, the 3rd deck down.
About the center of the ship?
Not quite the center of the ship.
Were there any tests made from the upper deck?
Not that I know of, sir.
What else was done in Southampton?
We shipped coal, provisions, cargo was taken on board, passed the Board of Trade test and survey.
The Southampton Board of Trade officer. What did he do?
He carried out the requisite tests required by the British Board of Trade.
Did you accompany him?
Yes, I was with him part of the time.
Who was this officer of the British Board of Trade?
Captain Clark.
He was an officer.
He was purely a representative of the British Board of Trade appointed by the British Board of Trade with post at the Port of Southampton survey.
He was assigned to Southampton.
Yes, sir.
How old a man was he?
About 45.
Of English nationality?
Yes,
Had you ever seen him before?
frequently.
Do you know whether he had an experience in maritime service?
All surveyors, I understand, have been in command. I know he had for a number of years.
What does that mean, that he had been in command?
In command of a British ship captain.
How much time did this officer spend on the ship?
That I could not say.
How much time did he spend when he was with you?
About 4 hours.
Then did you turn him over to some other officer?
Yes, sir.
To what other officer?
I think it was the first.
What was his name?
Mr. Murdoch.
Did he survive the Titanic disaster?
No, sir. He was chief then.
He did not survive.
No, sir.
Do you know whether any other officer of the ship accompanied the inspector during his stay on board?
That I could not say with certainty.
What is your best judgment about it?
I should say the Marine Superintendent was with him the whole time
The Marine Superintendent.
of the White Star Line in Southampton.
What is his name?
Captain Steele,
How old a man is he?
about 50.
Is he a commander?
Yes, sir.
Had you ever seen one of these ocean liners inspected by the British Board of Trade representatives before?
Frequently.
How thorough are they about it?
Speaking of Captain Clark, we call him a nuisance because he is so strict.
Captain Clark,
Yes, sir.
is he the Marine officer?
That is the Board of Trade representative.
In what respect is he a nuisance?
Because he makes us fork out every detail.
I should suppose you would be quite willing to do that.
Perfectly willing.
Do you mean by that he would call attention to the absence of tools, implements, and devices necessary for the ship's full equipment?
No, sir. He would insist upon them all being absolutely brought out on deck every time.
On what?
Everything that contributes to the ship's equipment.
What would that consist of?
The whole of the ship's life-saving equipment.
Life preservers.
Life preservers throughout the ship, all the boats turned out, uncovered, all the tanks examined, all the breakers examined, oars counted, boats turned out, rudders tried, all of the davits tried. There was innumerable detail work.
And the boat's lowered.
The boats lowered, put in the water, and pulled out and brought back again. And if he was not satisfied, sent back again.
And the ropes and chains tested.
Yes, sir.
When he inspected your ship, about where would he find these life preservers?
Life belts in every room, in every compartment, where, as we say, was habitation, where a man could live.
Would that include the steerage?
Yes, undoubtedly, and the crew's quarters.
In the steerage, do they have rooms?
Yes, sir.
And they are equipped
Yes, sir.
with the same apparatus for the preservation of life in an emergency as the first or second cabins?
Identically the same.
You use the term life belt.
Yes, sir.
I wish you would describe the life belt.
It consists of a series of pieces of cork. Allow me to show you by illustration. A hole is cut in there, and the head to go through this, and this falls over front and back, and there are tapes from the back then tied around the front. It is a new idea and very effective because no one can mistake in putting it on.
Is there cork on both sides?
On both sides.
Are the arms free?
Free, absolutely.
And when in the water, does this adhere or extend?
It is tied to the body.
It's tied to the body.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had one of these on?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever been into the sea with one of them?
Yes, sir.
Where?
From the Titanic.
In this recent collision?
Yes, sir.
How long were you in the sea with a life belt on?
Between half an hour and an hour.
What time did you leave the ship?
I didn't leave it.
Did the ship leave you?
Yes, sir.
Did you stay until the ship had departed entirely?
Yes, sir.
I wish you would tell us whether the suction incidental in the sinking of a vessel was a great deterrent in making progress away from the boat.
It was hardly noticeable.
From what point on the vessel did you leave it?
On top of the officers' quarters.
And where were the officers' quarters?
Immediately abaft the bridge.
Immediately abaft the bridge.
Abaft the wheelhouse.
Was that pretty well toward the top of the vessel?
Yes, sir.
Were the lifeboats gone when you found yourself without any footing?
All except one.
Where was that one?
In the tackles, trying to get it over.
Did not the tackle work readily?
Yes, sir.
What delayed it?
It was the third boat over by the same tackles.
The third boat over by the same tackles?
Yes, sir.
From what deck?
The boat deck.
The sun deck.
The sun deck.
How close were you to the lifeboat at that time?
15 feet.
Was it filled before starting to lower it?
It was not high enough to lower.
Why?
It was not high enough to lower. They were then endeavoring to get it over the bulwarks, outboard, swinging it, getting it out over the bulwarks. When it was over the bulwarks, then it would hang in the tackles, and until hung in the tackles, it was impossible to put anyone in it.
How far below the boat deck?
Above the boat deck.
How far above the boat deck?
About 4 feet 6 inches.
And it was lowered to the boat deck?
It did not get over the bulwarks to be lowered.
The last you saw of it?
Yes, sir.
Who was managing this tackle?
First officer, Mr. Murdoch.
He lost his life.
Yes, sir.
Did you see Mr. Ismay at that time?
No, sir.
Did you at any time?
Yes, sir.
Where?
On the boat deck.
How long before she sunk?
At first, before we started the boats, when we started to uncover the boats.
I did not quite catch that.
When we started to uncover the boats.
How long was that after the collision?
About 20 minutes.
What was he doing?
Standing still.
Dressed?
I could not say, sir. It was too dark.
Was he talking with anyone?
No, sir.
He was alone.
Yes, sir.
On what deck?
On the boat deck.
Were there any other passengers on that deck?
Not that I saw at that time.
Did you see any there afterwards?
Plenty.
Had the passengers the right to go on that deck from below?
Every right.
There was no restraint at the staircase?
None.
Was that true as to the steerage?
The steerage have no right up there, sir.
Did they on that occasion?
Oh, yes.
Then there was no restraint.
Oh, absolutely none.
There must have been considerable confusion.
Not that I noticed.
Was everybody orderly?
Perfectly,
How long did you see Mr. Ismay there alone?
as I passed.
Were you going at that time?
I was attending to the boats, seeing the men distributed, having the boat covers stripped off.
You say they were 15 feet from this last boat when it was lowered.
It was not lowered, sir. I was 15 feet from it when they were endeavoring to get it into the tackles.
Did you go nearer to it than that?
I did not have the opportunity, sir.
Why not?
The ship went down.
Was this boat ever lowered?
No, sir.
It remained in the tackle.
Yes, sir.
When did you see Mr. Ismay with reference to the attempted lowering of this boat?
I saw Mr. Ismay, as I stated to you, sir, once only.
Only once.
Yes, sir.
And that was about 20 minutes after the collision.
Yes, sir.
And there were no other passengers on that deck at that time.
Not that I noticed. I should notice Mr. Ismay, naturally, more than I should notice passengers,
Why?
because I know him,
How long have you known him?
since I have been in the company.
Are you quite well acquainted with the officers of the company?
I naturally know them by sight.
Does he know you?
Oh, he knew me, yes.
Does he speak with you?
No, sir.
Who was he with at the time?
No one.
Neither spoke to the other.
No, sir.
Did he see you?
Yes, sir. I don't know whether he recognized me.
Do you know where the captain was at that time?
I could not say, sir.
Did you see him on the bridge?
Previous to that, I had seen him on the bridge.
How long before that?
About 3 minutes after the impact,
Did he leave the bridge or remain there and you leave your point of occupation?
I left.
You left.
Yes, sir.
Where did you go?
Back to my berth.
What for?
There was no call for me to be on deck.
No call or no cause?
As far as I could see, neither call nor cause.
You mean from the moment of the impact?
Yes, sir.
Did you believe that the boat was in danger?
No, sir.
You felt that it was not a serious incident.
I did not think it was a serious accident.
What was the force of the impact?
A slight jar and a grinding sound.
From front or side?
Naturally, I should think it was in front, whether I could tell or not.
You could not tell exactly.
No, sir.
Was there a noise?
Very little.
Very little.
Very little.
Did you go back to your room under the impression that the boat had not been injured?
Yes, sir.
Didn't you tell Mr. Ismay that night?
I had not seen Mr. Ismay then.
Did you tell him that afterwards?
Really, I could not say, sir.
Where were you when the impact occurred?
In my berth.
Asleep.
No, sir. I was just getting off asleep.
You arose.
Yes, sir.
Did you dress yourself?
No, sir.
What did you put on, if anything?
Nothing.
You went out of your room.
Yes, sir.
Forward?
Out on deck.
On deck?
Yes, I walked forward.
You walked forward how far?
A matter of 10 feet until I could see the bridge distinctly.
You could see the bridge distinctly, and the captain was on the bridge.
The captain and first officer.
Did you see any other officers at that time?
I did not notice them.
Had no alarm been given at that time?
None.
How much time elapsed after the impact and your appearance on the deck?
I should say about 2 or 3 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Then you returned? How long did you remain on deck?
About 2 or 3 minutes.
At that time, who else was on deck at that point?
Excluding the bridge, I saw no one except third officer, who left his berth shortly after I did.
Did he join you?
Yes.
Did you confer about what happened?
Yes, sir.
What did you conclude had happened?
Nothing much.
You knew there had been a collision.
Not necessarily a collision.
You knew you had struck something.
Yes, sir.
What did you assume it to be?
Ice.
Ice.
Yes, sir.
Why?
That was the conclusion one naturally jumps to around the banks there.
Had you seen ice before?
No, sir.
Had there been any tests taken of the temperature of the water?
A test is taken of the water every 2 hours from the time the ship leaves until she returns to port.
Do you know whether these tests were made?
They were.
Did you make them?
Oh, no, sir.
Were they made under your direction?
No, sir.
How do you know they were made?
It is the routine of the ship.
You assume they were made,
Yes, sir.
but you cannot say of your own knowledge that they were.
Not of my own actual seeing, no, sir.
How were these tests made?
By drawing water from over the side in a canvas bucket and placing a thermometer in it.
How far down do you dip this water? Do you try and get surface water, or did you try and get below?
It is impossible to get to water below, just surface.
You get the surface water entirely.
Yes, sir.
These tests had been made that day
Yes.
at intervals of 2 hours.
Yes, sir.
This was on Sunday.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear anything about the rope or chain or wire to which the test basins were attached, not reaching the water at any time during those tests?
The bucket you speak of?
Yes.
No, sir.
Would a complaint of that character come to you if it had been true?
Very quickly, I should think, sir.
How would it come to you?
From the person who saw it, I should think.
It would be his duty to report to you.
Undoubtedly.
Directly to you?
Directly to the officer in charge of the ship at the time.
Who was in charge of the ship on Sunday?
Each officer kept his own watch, sir.
Were you in charge?
During my watch,
What hours were your watch?
6 o'clock until 10 o'clock
At night?
and morning.
So from that 6 o'clock in the evening on Sunday
Yes, sir.
until 10 o'clock, you were in charge.
Yes, sir.
And during that time, 2 tests should have been made of the temperature of the water with the purpose of ascertaining whether you were in the vicinity of icebergs.
No, sir.
For what purpose are the tests made?
They were routine, sir. It is customary to make them.
Do you mean that you take these tests when you are not in the vicinity of the Great Banks?
From the time we leave port, any port in the world, until the time we get to the next port in any part of the world. These are tests taken by the White Star Line.
Did you take these tests when you were in the Gulf Stream?
We take them all the time, every 2 hours.
Regardless of the location of the circumstances
Yes, sir.
or conditions?
Yes, sir. I may accept in narrow waters, such as rivers or harbors. We do not take them there.
Is this test taken for the purpose of ascertaining the temperature of the water?
Yes, sir.
Merely.
Merely.
What does the temperature of the water indicate to you?
Nothing more than the temperature of the air, sir.
Does it not indicate the proximity of colder area or unusual condition?
No, sir. It indicates cold water, sir, of course.
Can you tell us how cold the water was?
I know what it was when I was in it.
I should like to have your judgment about it.
I should say it was not much over freezing. How much, I could not say. It might be 33 or 34.
Not much over freezing.
No, sir.
What did the tests show?
I do not know, sir.
You mean they did not report to you?
It is entered into a book, sir.
And the fact is not communicated to you directly after each test.
Not unless I ask for it.
And you did not think it necessary to ask for it that night.
No, sir.
You knew you were in the vicinity of icebergs, did you not?
Water is absolutely no guide to icebergs, sir.
I did not ask that. Did you know you were in the vicinity of icebergs?
No, sir.
Did you know of the wireless message from the America to the Titanic warning you that you were in the vicinity of icebergs?
From the America to the Titanic.
Yes.
I cannot say that I saw that individual message.
Did you hear of it?
I could not say, sir.
Would you have heard of it
Most probably, sir.
if that had been the case?
Most probably, sir.
In fact, it would have been the duty of the person receiving the message to communicate it to you, for you were in charge of the ship.
Under the commander's orders, sir.
But you received no communication of that kind.
I do not know whether I received the Americas. I knew that a communication had been from some ship. I cannot say that it was from the America.
Giving the latitude and longitude of those icebergs,
No, no latitude.
and that they were prevalent.
Speaking of icebergs and naming their longitude.
Just tell us, if anything, what you did hear about that and from whom, if you can.
From what ship the message came, I have forgotten, but the message contained information that there was ice from 49 degrees to 51,
How do you know it came?
because I saw it.
That is since the collision?
Not that I know of.
Have you seen it since the collision?
Not that I know of. Whether it was the same message or not, I have seen none. I have seen some. Whether it is the same or not, I do not know. I have not seen the same to my knowledge.
From whom did you get that information?
From the captain.
That night?
Yes.
At what time did you get that information?
I think it was that afternoon.
At what time?
About 1 o'clock.
Where were you then?
On the bridge.
With the captain?
Yes.
Where was the ship with reference to her latitude?
I could not tell you that without working it out, sir.
What time was it in the day?
About 1 o'clock.
You were not then the officer?
I was relieving for lunch.
So that from the time this communication came to you, you were not in charge of the ship until 6 o'clock that night.
Exactly.
Who succeeded you as officer of the ship?
The first officer, Mr. Murdoch.
Did you communicate to him this information that the captain has given you on the bridge?
I communicated that when I was relieving him at 1 o'clock.
What did you tell him?
Exactly what was in the telegram.
What did he say?
All right.
So that the officers of the ship, the officer in charge, Mr. Murdoch, was fully advised by you that you were in the proximity of these icebergs.
I would hardly call that proximity.
Pardon me, I will complete my question. And you were advised by the captain that it was the case, or reserving it. You were advised by the captain by word of mouth and communicated that the officer Murdoch in charge of the ship, to which he replied, all right.
Yes, sir.
Did you hold any further consultation about it?
With the first officer? No, sir.
How fast was the boat going at the time?
About 21 and a half or 22.
21 and a half or 22 knots?
Yes, sir.
Was that her maximum speed?
I do not know, sir. I could not say, sir.
Do you know whether she went any faster than that at any time on the trip?
As far as we understood, she would eventually go faster than that when the ship was tuned up.
But that was as fast as she went on the trial tests.
I do not know what her speed was on the trial trip.
I thought you indicated that it was about that. She was, however, running at her maximum speed at the time.
We understood she would or was not at her maximum speed.
That is, you understood that there was still reserve power there.
Yes.
That had not been exhausted.
Yes.
Did you have any instructions from anybody to exhaust that power?
None.
Did you have any ambition of your own to see it exhausted?
Yes, I dare say.
You wanted to see it go as fast as she could.
At some time or another, yes.
What was that shared by your associates among the officers?
Oh, I could not say, sir.
Did they not talk about it?
Well, naturally, we talked. We wondered what her maximum speed would eventually be.
You were anxious to see it tested.
Not necessarily anxious.
Interested, however.
Interested, yes.
When you turned the ship over to the second officer, Mr. Murdoch,
The first officer.
when you turned the ship over to the first officer, Mr. Murdoch, where did you go?
Oh, what time are we speaking of now?
I am speaking of about noon or 1 o'clock.
I went for my lunch.
And what did you do after that?
I went below.
Where?
Below to my berth or wherever it happens to be. We call those quarters generally below.
Generally below. And did you find anybody there when you got below?
Yes, the watch below was, I suppose, was there.
Did you have any talk with him about the word that the captain had given you?
No, sir.
Did you have any talk with anybody about it?
No, sir. Not that I remember.
How long did you remain in your room?
I dare say I was in and out of the room 2 or 3 times during the afternoon. Later on, I laid down in the afternoon to sleep and got up and wrote some letters or something like that.
And took your own place again in command of the ship, or rather as officer of the watch at 6 o'clock.
At 6 o'clock.
At that time, did you say anything to the other officers who were on duty at the time about this information that the captain gave you?
Not that I remember, sir.
Was the lookout increased that evening after you took the watch?
No, sir.
What was the complement of your ship that night in officers?
You mean on deck, sir?
Yes, sir.
Myself and 2 juniors.
Where were those 2 juniors stationed?
They have various duties to perform, taking the various parts of the ship, sometimes in the wheelhouse at different periods. One has to go on full rounds of the ship to see that everything is in order.
Oh, when you came on watch at 6 o'clock, was the captain of the bridge on the bridge, or did you see him?
I didn't see him at 6 o'clock.
When did you next see him?
About 5 minutes to 9 was the next
Yeah, but-
time I saw it.
5 minutes to 9.
Yes, sir.
In his absence, who was on the bridge?
Myself.
Did you relieve him?
The captain?
Yes.
No, sir. The first officer. I beg your pardon. I relieved the chief.
You relieved the chief
Yes, sir.
and went to the bridge.
I relieved the chief. The chief's watch was from 2 until 6. I relieved the chief officer at 6 o'clock and carried on the watch until 10.
Did you remain on the bridge
Yes, sir.
from 6 until 10 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
During that time, was each officer or man in his position in the forward part of that vessel?
Yes, sir.
Who was there and where were they stationed?
2 men in the crow's nest, 1 man at the wheel, 1 man standing by.
What was the weather that night?
Clear and calm.
Were you at all apprehensive about your proximity to these icebergs?
No, sir.
And for that reason, you did not think it necessary to increase the official lookout?
No, sir.
And that was not done.
No, sir.
From 6 until 10 o'clock, was the captain on the bridge at all?
Yes, sir.
When did he arrive?
5 minutes to 9.
5 minutes to 9.
Yes, sir.
But he was not there from 6 o'clock until 5 minutes of 9.
I did not see him, sir.
You would have seen him if he had been there, would you not?
If he had been actually on the bridge, yes, I should have seen him.
You did not see him.
I did not see him
And you were there during all that time.
during all that time.
When he came to the bridge at 5 minutes of 9, what did he say to you, or what did you say to him? Who spoke first?
I could not say, sir. Probably one of us said good evening.
But you do not know. Who?
No.
Was anything else said?
Yes, we spoke about the weather, calmness of the sea, the clearness, about the time we should be getting up toward the vicinity of the ice, and how we should recognize it if we should see it, freshening of our minds as to the indications that ice gives of its proximity. We just coffered together generally for 25 minutes.
25 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Was any reference made at that time to the wireless message from the America?
Captain Smith made a remark that if it was in a slight degree hazy, there would be no doubt that we would have to go very slowly.
Did you slow up?
That I do not know, sir.
You would have known if it had been done, would you not, during your watch?
Not necessarily so, sir.
Who would give the command?
The commander would send orders down to the chief engineer to reduce her by so many revolutions.
Through a megaphone?
No, sir, by word of hand.
By speaking tube?
No, by word of hand. Notes.
Did you see anything of that kind done?
No, sir, I did not see it on the bridge.
And the captain was on the bridge?
Yes, sir.
How long did he remain on the bridge after coming there at 5 minutes of 9?
He remained there until about 20 past 9 or something like that.
About 20 minutes past 9.
About 25 minutes altogether.
Then did he leave the bridge?
He left the bridge.
With any special injunction upon you?
Yes, sir.
What did he say?
If in the slightest degree of doubt, let me know.
What did you say to him?
All right, sir.
You kept the ship on its course
Yes, sir.
and about the same speed.
Yes, sir, as far as I know.
When did you next see the captain?
When I came out of the quarters after the impact.
You mean that he did not return to the bridge until your watch expired?
No, sir.
About 10 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
You left
Yes, sir.
and Murdoch took command.
Yes, sir.
Do you know where you were at that hour? You turned over the watch to Mr. Murdoch?
Not now, sir.
Did you know at the time?
Yes, sir.
Can you give us any idea?
When I ended the watch, we roughly judged that we should be getting toward the vicinity of the ice as reported by the Marconigram that I saw somewhere about 11 o'clock.
that you would be in that latitude
Longitude.
at 11 o'clock.
Somewhere about 11, yes.
Did you talk with Mr. Murdoch about that phase of it when you left the watch?
About what?
I say, did you talk with Mr. Murdoch about the iceberg situation when you left the watch?
No, sir.
Did he ask you anything about it?
No, sir.
What was said between you?
We remarked on the weather, about its being calm, clear. We remarked the distance we could see. We seemed to be able to see a long distance. Everything was very clear. We could see the stars setting down to the horizon.
It was cold, was it not?
Yes, sir.
Sharp.
Yes, sir.
How cold was it?
31, sir.
Above zero?
31 degrees above zero, yes, sir.
Is that unusually cold for that longitude
No, sir.
at that time of the year?
No, sir.
Did you see Mr. Murdoch after that?
Yes, sir. I saw him when I came out of the quarters after the impact
Where was he?
on the bridge.
With the captain.
One on one side and one on the other side of the bridge, one on each side.
Did you speak to him after that?
No, sir.
I mean, after he took the watch.
No, sir.
You never spoke to him again.
No, sir.
You were not together when you finally parted from the ship.
No, sir.
You saw him on the bridge at that time.
Immediately after the impact, yes, sir.
Did he remain there until the end?
He was getting the boats out on the starboard side later on.
Later.
Yes, sir.
Did you see him at the work?
No, sir. I was on the port side.
How do you know that he did it?
I saw him at the last boat.
Just what time he left the bridge, I don't suppose you know?
No, sir.
Where did you last see the captain?
On the boat deck, sir.
On the boat deck.
Yes, sir.
How long before the vessel sank?
I could not say, sir. I saw him on the boat deck 2 or 3 times. I had occasion to go to him.
Was the vessel broken into in any manner or intact?
Absolutely intact.
On the decks?
Intact, sir.
When you came out of your room after the impact, did you see any ice on the decks?
No, sir.
Did you see or hear any exclamations of pain?
No, sir.
Do you know whether anyone was injured
No, sir.
by ice on the deck?
No, sir.
Tell us as nearly as you can just where you saw the captain last with reference to the sinking of this ship.
I think the bridge was the last place I saw him. Sir, I'm not sure. I think he was crossing the bridge,
What do you mean by that?
walking across.
From one side to the other?
No, sir, just coming across. I merely recognized a glimpse. I have a slight recollection of having seen him whilst I was walking. It is my recollection that I saw him crossing the bridge. I think that was the last.
How large was this bridge? How large was it on the Titanic?
It extends the width of the ship, sir.
It extends the width of the ship.
Yes, sir, and 18 inches over each side.
And how far forward?
In amidships, about 20 feet. In the wings, about 10 feet.
When you saw him, was he giving any orders?
I was not near enough to know, sir.
How near were you?
About 50 feet away.
What did he seem to be doing? Pacing?
No, sir, not pacing, just walking straight across, as if he had some object that he was walking toward.
He was walking from one side to the other.
Yes, sir, from starboard to port.
Did that give him a full sweep view of the situation?
Yes, sir.
If he had been giving orders, would you have heard them?
Yes, sir.
And you did not hear any such thing at that time?
At that time, no, sir.
What were the last orders you heard him give?
When I asked him, shall I put the women and children in the boats? He replied, yes, and lower away. Those were the last orders he gave.
Where was he at that time?
About abreast the number 6 boat.
Thank you for joining us for the first day of the Titanic disaster hearings. We will be continuing this story next week. And big thanks again to our friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. You can visit him at his website, shakespeareapproves.com, or on Facebook at Shakespeare Approves, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. Got links to all his content and more in the comments of this video. Also, a big thanks to all of the actors who volunteered to read with us tonight. And if you enjoyed this reading, all of our past readings are available on our Facebook page and a little bit organized on our website, zenithplayers.com. If you want more information on us, including how to be involved in a reading just like this one, you can go to our Facebook page, Zenith Players, send us a message, or send an email to casting@zenithplayers.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. We want to continue to express our support to everyone out there working to keep us safe. And again, we will continue this story next Saturday. Thank you.